Sure. Good evening. I'm Eric Greenberg, Chair of the FY24 CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this work session is being live streamed. You can find the agendas and background materials for this evening on the CA Board of Directors webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those watching the work session there. If you're virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please make sure that all cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak, and I'll record the names in the order which I see them. If you're virtual, please use the chat feature and raise your hand. As we move through the work session, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate a motion, and as well as who motioned it and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any member present, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Alan Klein. I will now call the roll. Sky.
Here.
Dietrich. Reg. Karen.
Here.
Chris. Alan.
Here.
Dennis.
Here.
Keith.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
And I am here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the agenda? Seeing no objections, the agenda is passed by unanimous consent. We will now move on to resident speak out. Speakers will be asked to speak in the order in which they signed up. Individuals have up to 3 minutes for comment. Anyone representing an organization is allowed 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. We ask that speakers adhere to the 3 or 5 minute time limit when presenting their testimony, and for board members to limit questions in order to stay within the allotted time period. Our first speaker is Joel Hurwitz. Joel?
He's on virtual.
He's probably going to vote it.
Is he muted?
No, K1 has to promote him.
Oh.
So it takes a couple seconds.
Okay.
Tell him he's muted if he's talking.
What?
He's muted.
Joel, are you muted?
All right, I'm here now.
We can hear you.
If I'm first, that means nobody signed up because I did it at like 4 o'clock yesterday. Right now, you lost me my notes. All right, good evening, Joel Hurwitz. For the record, I'm Vice Chair of Harper's Choice Board, but speaking for myself. To be or not to be, that is the question of the strategic plan. The answer is it should not be in its current form. Beginning with the grammatically challenged and weak mission statements, it brought back somewhat bad memories of Thanksgiving break freshman year when my English professor demanded that my 2-page essay could not use any verbs to be. Try writing something that stays in a 2-page limit without is, am, are, was, were, be, being, and being. Say that the objective is to build and maintain trust and open dialogue between CA and its 10 villages. Then you talk about codifying and formalizing the role of villages. Where are you going to do that? I can't get you to recognize the language in the 10 village articles of incorporation that specify the election procedures for the Columbia Council representatives. And another page, it talks 3 times about putting information in the village newsletters. You can ask, can't require it. But then it gets worse. You're going to reserve spots in the city and the village board for young adults, minorities, and women to encourage diversity. How are you going to do that? It's not your place to put in a strategic plan for the 10 independent village corporations. This would seek to amend the documents for the villages, not CA. For if you did amend the charter, which you could, to restrict membership, it would not be politically feasible. As Alan previously mentioned at one of the previous meetings, that only villages with age could be on the CA board. Well, that might meet the rules, but I think it would have been met by legislation from the county delegation. The boards don't need quotas. Currently, I'm the only male on 5 voting members of my board. And the CA board is currently half women and minorities. A few years ago, it was predominantly female. can't force the villages to amend our governing documents. And I believe most of the CA board knows this. So why is VPC including this? And why did the president allow it in its form on the agenda tonight? Do the consultants have a clue that complicated relationship between the villages, the Columbia Council, and the Columbia Association? These are not self-appointing private corporations, as I would guess they normally worked with. Changing topics at a previous meeting, there's discussion about tabling and following Robert's rules, which your bylaws say that you do. But your 3 meeting rule misstates use of tabling, because if you look at Roberts, it says this motion is commonly misused in orderly assemblies in place of a motion postponed indefinitely to postpone to a certain time or other motions, particularly in such misuses is often known as a motion to table. In orderly assemblies, a motion to lay on table is out of order if the evident intent is to kill or avoid dealing with the measure. So you misuse it, county council misuses it, and you
Joel, you're at time.
In your 3 meeting rule guidelines.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Joel?
I do.
Keith?
Joel, in Robert's rules, are you familiar with the difference between parliamentary authority and governing?
No, by reading the page that deals with tabling, and it's similar in Roberts for Dummies. It says basically the same thing, that most bodies misuse tabling and should be using a motion to postpone indefinitely or postpone for a certain time, and has consequences because a motion to table is not debatable, but the other 2 are.
Can I clarify, or is it just questions?
You can clarify.
So governing is adopting Robert's rules for the general facilitation of a meeting, whereas authority says that we're going to follow all of the rules of a particular version. And I think that these comments we need to make sure that we're clear on. We state that we're using them for governing. We don't say that they are the authority for our meetings. Otherwise, we would be terribly inadequate in our operations. So,
Any other questions?
I believe your bylaws say you follow Roberts unless you have policies that supersede them.
Correct.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Sharon Boyes representing Protect Our Streams. Sorry here. Oh, there she is.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for your commitment to our community, and thank you for this opportunity.
the mic is on.
Is your,
that
Sharon,
mic on?
is your microphone on?
I have no idea.
Because I can barely hear you.
Can we start my time over? Thank you.
Please reset the time to 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. Thank you for your commitment to our community, and thank you for this opportunity. This feels like deja vu for me. I thought we were going to have a discussion about proposed land use policy tonight to talk about adding layers of protection for the board, the residents, CA, and our open space. I see a discussion listed on the agenda, but the new proposal didn't make it into the packet last I checked. Protecting our finite, irreplaceable, and invaluable open space should always be a top priority. There's an extensive list of proposed changes for the board to review this evening, some that may even require changes to the charter. On the cusp of big changes to our leadership and oversight, but the one thing we should be talking about, you keep trying to dismiss. I wish Jim Rouse was still alive. I wondered what he would think about all the changes to his utopia. Would he approve of the change to our logo or our colors that were green and yellow? What would he think of an open space manager and administration that thinks the way to manage the open space is to log it? Would he approve of the degradation of Longfellow and the stream he used to walk along that was full of life until the restoration? The current CA mission statement says, engage our diverse community, cultivate a unique sense of place, and enhance quality of life. Pretty awesome. But you want to spend the time to discuss if we should change that to either build or make Columbia great again? I mean, a place where everyone wants to be, everyone is welcome to be, and everyone is happy to be? Like you can build or make that?
Why are we wasting our time on this? The Longfellow and WSSI debacle proved a few things. CA staff weren't and are not experts. This has caused a lot of distrust among the community, and it's exposed the need for greater protections all the way around. The response to the community has been difficult to watch. The pushback on the residents, the greenwashing on Longfellow, the move to limit resident speak out after WSSI pulled out when we exposed the truth. There's the weird stuff with the WAC becoming a secret committee with little to no transparency or accountability. And now more recently is this stubborn resistance to address land use concerns via new common sense, common decency, and common courtesy land use policy. I see many of the proposed suggestions will further weaken the board's oversight and ability to do their job, which is to oversee the president and the business of the association, and I suggest you review the changes through that lens. Some of the changes seem like they could possibly impact the upcoming elections. This isn't quite as bad as when Lakey changed the tradition literally hours before an election, but close. It's time for the board to stand up for itself and take charge. Stop kowtowing to the staff. You're the bosses. The board needs to be able to protect itself, so take a close look at the proposed new purchase policy and choose to opt out. When Lakey supporters were slamming the board about the need to be more diversified, it was as if they lacked a complete understanding of the volunteer time commitment that is required of board members, which greatly reduces the candidate pool. Certainly anyone is welcome to run for a village board seat, and there are times when not even all seats are filled. So don't let CA take control of the villages and the board. CA needs to work with the villages and listen to the board. I suggest you strike out any changes to the election for now, unless the changes for residents to vote on all upper management positions in CA. Also to prohibit a person from sitting on a Howard County and Columbia board at the same time. Pages 4 through 7 of the proposed updates to this strategic plan needs some work, and I'm going to send specific comments in the next week, but a lot of our concerns would be addressed if you adopted the new land use policy. I'd like to end on a more positive note. I'm noticing that folks have really been working on cutting vines out of our trees, which might not sound like a big deal, but it's huge. It's a lot of work, and it'll make all the difference for our remaining trees' survival. I was also happy to see that the Harper's Choice Cares group planted a degraded streams banks with live stakes, which is what the contractors plant in new stream restorations to stabilize the new banks and to shade the stream water. I completely applaud and support their efforts to use this lighter touch and natural approach in a fragile stream ecosystem. Now they just need to capture the upland stormwater runoff in some bioretentions and rain gardens before it reaches the stream and allow the recovery to begin. Like Jim Rouse said, beauty is free if you plan to respect the man and the land. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
You mentioned that the WAC was a secret committee. Could you give some more details about that?
Yeah, it seems like it's really hard for people to find out when meetings are going to be, how to sign up for them, where you can see a video of the meeting, what was discussed. I think we rely on people's notes for that. It just seems like it's kind of in the dark. I mean, this is something that used to be, more widely advertised,
So you're talking just about the WAC, not other
Actually, I think it's happened with a few committees, but I don't really have like the knowledge of what's happening with the other committees. I feel comfortable speaking about that, but Miss Pearl May Atkinson, I think is her name. There was a woman who testified a couple weeks ago about another committee that she was upset about that I, had heard about. I believe it's there's the Aging Committee, there's the Arts Committee. I mean, I think there's a few of them. But again, I don't know what's going on with them, so I'm not really speaking for them.
And you know that not all committees are recorded.
I didn't know that. Again, I'm speaking for the WAC committee. As I said, I really don't know what's going on with those other committees, so I didn't know that, nor was I suggesting that they were. But the WAC committee used to be. It's very easy. It's YouTube. You just hit, why is that funny? Is that funny?
Oh, I'm just, being secret is not, I've never had any difficulty finding out when a committee meets.
Scott, do you have a question? Further questions? Any other further questions? I actually do have one question. So you mentioned the easement policy a couple times.
Yes.
Are there any particular provisions that you feel most strongly that need to be updated? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, absolutely. Having our easements evaluated by an independent expert who would, value the land, make sure that Columbia is getting its fair share of any deal. If it has to do with a watershed project, having a watershed expert review that, more notice to residents who are adjacent or near the projects, the ability for public comments on projects and to have some input on what's going on with them. I could keep going. I mean, I plan on submitting comments. There's a bunch.
The top 2 or 3, not.
I think those are the top 2 or 3. More community engagement, notice, letting people know what's going on and giving them an opportunity to weigh in, and also Columbia getting its fair share. I mean, we have a finite amount of space, and we should really value it. And if we are going to sign easements, we should make sure that there is a benefit to everybody for that, and not just the person that is getting the easement. I mean, I'm sure our land around here is very valuable, but it's valuable to the residents too, so.
Any other questions from board members?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Last, we have Randy Gardner representing the Howard County Holocaust Remembrance Committee.
Got to adjust the microphone a little bit.
Good evening.
Does this work? Can you hear me? Good evening. My name is Randy Gardner, and I'm here tonight representing, as you said, the Howard County Holocaust Memorial Committee. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to the board. What would it mean for Howard County to have a permanent memorial that commemorates those who were lost in the Holocaust? And what would it mean if we had a monument that reminds us of the atrocities and hateful behaviors of the past and promotes tolerance and understanding in the future? We're here today to propose that stumbling stones be placed in prominent locations such as the lakefront to remember the loved ones of local Howard County residents who were torn from our lives by the Holocaust. Stumbling stones, known in German as Stubelstein, is a project that commemorates individuals exactly in their last place of residency before falling victim to Nazi terror. It was conceived by a German artist, Gunther Deming, in 1992, and there are over 100,000 stones that have been placed across 26 countries, making the Stubelstein Project the world's largest decentralized memorial. Now, these stumbling stones are approximately 4 by 4 concrete cubes with a brass plate inscribed, "Here lived," followed by the name and life dates of the victim of Nazi extermination and persecution. The literal definition of the word Stubelstein is stumbling stone or stumbling block, and they become part of the landscape and are actually stumbled on by passersby. The Stubelstein Project commemorates anyone persecuted or murdered by the Nazi regime, including Jews and non-Jews. Now, my wife and I have lived in Howard County for over 30 years and have been active in the Jewish community, and we've been involved in the Howard County Holocaust Committee for more than 15 years. My wife's family were taken to concentration camp and were killed in the Holocaust with no formal funeral or burial. Then she became aware of the Stubelstein Project and literally stumbled on the opportunity to give her grandparents a proper memorial by placing these stones in front of their house where they resided before they were taken by the Nazis. This past May, we traveled to Germany to dedicate stumbling stones at their house in Berlin. By doing this, we were able to provide closure and give them a permanent memorial and someplace where people could pay their respects and remember them. Needless to say, it was a very moving and impactful experience for all of us. So much so that we wanted to share this opportunity with our Howard County community. not only our friends and neighbors who might have lost families in the Holocaust, but with residents and visitors who wish to reflect on the significant events and honor those who fell victim to the Nazi regime. This is why we're here today. It is our hope that we could have these or similar stumbling stones installed at the lakefront in Columbia. This way, people in our community could discover or stumble upon these stones and reflect on the atrocities of the Holocaust that took place, and remember the victims that perished, and promote tolerance and understanding. In the words of the Stubelstein Project, every stone has its story. So please help us begin by having stumbling stones installed in Howard County. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'd also like to invite you to attend the annual Yom HaShoah Memorial Service on Sunday, May 5th, starting at 7 p.m. at the Meeting House in Oakland Mills. And wouldn't it be great if we could announce that at that program? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Helen?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thank you. Do you have any sense of how much the stone cost to build and place and maintain?
There are several ways that I can answer that. The simplest way is what we're doing for the ceremony on May 5th is I went out and bought 2 stumbling stones, and it's at the engraver to have them made. So it depends on,
Give me a ballpark.
It's under $100.
$100 for a stone, okay. Do you have a sense of how many people would be honored in this way?
No, I mean, we could put that out to the community and see, but I think the idea being that let's place the first one and then encourage others, so it almost becomes a pathway. Because when you travel through Europe, in Germany and other countries, you'll look down and you'll see these.
Well, you mentioned that, and so that I was wondering, have you approached the county or Howard Hughes or other landowners? Because if we're talking about stumbling upon things, it seems to me they ought to be spread out different places.
Well, when the committee, we wanted to start here because the lakefront is such a visible area and sees so much traffic.
Thank you. Last question. Are these conceived as part of the landscape in a sense, or are they conceived as sort of sacred things that nobody should walk on? That was my question. Because 4x4 takes up a fair amount of
That's
space.
an interesting question because, one, they can be incorporated into the landscape. The ones at my wife's, and my wife is here with me this evening, there was a cobblestone section in front of the house where it was dedicated. We could put 2 stones in the ground and either make it where people can stumble on it or have it a dedicated. That's really, up for discussion and exploration. What would make the most sense? There's another idea would be if you kind of make a section of cobblestones, small section memorial type of thing, and then have these 2. And I have handouts that would explain the actual suggested copy that would be on the stumbling stones.
Great, thank you.
The first one, these stones commemorate loved ones of the local residents torn from their lives by the Holocaust. May their memory be a blessing. So that would be 1 stone, and then right next to that, stumbling stones are a European project to mark the last home of individuals before they fell a victim of the Holocaust, and a website where if people are interested, they could do that.
And would these title stones have to show up anywhere a stumbling stone was, anywhere in the city? I mean, if they're placed not just at the lakefront, if they're placed other places.
Oh, they could be,
well.
yeah.
Would these I'm calling them title stones that have that text you just read, would they have to be placed there as well so people knew what they were looking at, or just
I
at the lakefront?
I would think so.
Okay,
The
thank you.
ones throughout Europe have people's names, but these wouldn't be in front of anyone's former resident
Right.
It's more to draw awareness, and by having a website or a QR code, you know, if you're interested, hey, I know somebody that, you know, this would be applicable to.
Great, thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gardner, for coming today. So, yeah, I have some add-on questions. Alan asked a lot of my questions, but, so you're going to have these 2 tidal stones, and then there's going to be a link on one of the stones to a website, you said?
Yes,
Okay, and so then people can, you're hoping that people then will go out and purchase for their loved ones stumbling stones that will be placed? Is that the idea? And so you want to create, okay, so it sounded like what you're saying to Alan is it would be a walkway. Am I missing something there? Like
no, we're proposing to start off with the 2 stumbling stones together
just to inform people?
to inform people.
Okay.
And then that might open up an opportunity for other people to either investigate it for their own loved ones or have similar stumbling stones around different paths around the area.
Okay, when you thought about the lakefront, did you have like a general position on the lakefront? I'm only concerned, my only question is because I know that a lot of people bought bricks with their names on them, and now the collective in the summertime puts their chairs and tables on those. So I'm just curious where you thought where they would get the most exposure.
Initially, probably in the, I'll call it the plaza, either by the People Tree
Okay,
or by the Rouse Monument and that, I'll call it garden area, you know, so that, yeah, they could walk over them or stumble, as the name indicates, but they could actually stop and read and see what it's all about.
okay, thank you very much.
I'll leave that up to the committee. I mean, that's just one man's thought, knowing the landscape, so to speak, as I do.
Right, thank you.
Any further questions? I just basically have one question. So the ask from the Columbia Association, is it basically just the space on the lakefront, or is it the space plus the cost? Basically, what are you asking us to provide? What are you? How are you asking us to support the effort? So are you just looking for the space to place the stumbling stones, or is it, are you looking for us to purchase the stumbling stones?
I think that's, you know, that really is up for further discussion. I mean, I could see the committee getting together and donating, and then the Columbia Association handles the installation.
Okay.
You know, we'll supply the materials.
And then the Columbia Association.
Where do we have it placed?
Then the Columbia Association would be responsible for the installation and finding the location.
Correct.
Thanks. Did you have a question?
When you say 4 by 4, is that 4 inches by 4 inches or 4
It's
feet
a
by
cube. 4 inches. It's
by 4 inches? Not
4 inches by
okay.
4 inches and 4 inches deep. I would have brought some tonight, but they're at the engravers.
Okay. That's a good point, because I was envisioning 4 feet by 4 feet.
That's what I
Well,
would.
why don't
Yeah, they look
it might help if I pass these around.
I was actually thinking it would be meters, because it'd be a European-based kind of thing, so the engineer, you know.
That'd be a pretty big stone.
Yeah.
Any last questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Who's next, Eric?
That concludes resident speak out for this evening. To limit interruptions during board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay as an attendee to watch the remainder of this work session. You can also watch a live stream on the CA Livestream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. I'll now take a moment to allow staff to make the transition.
Alan, did you get one of these?
I did, thank you.
Everybody? Okay.
But, yeah, they're, strategic plan next. Break up the session. So our first item on the agenda is the strategic plan for 60 minutes. I'll introduce VPC to give us an overview of the status of the strategic plan.
Yes, thank you. Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having us again. We're Vision Planning and Consulting. We have been updating the 2024 CA Strategic Plan, thank you, since November of last year, 2023. We've had several different points of coordination with several different stakeholders, community partners, villages, the senior leadership team here at CA, as well as the board. And on that note, we met with the board here on February 1st for a large work session where we reviewed the previous and potentially updated mission and vision. We reviewed strategic focus areas as well as objectives. And we do believe that there was a general vision taken away from that session. And today's update reflects what those comments, it reflects the comments that we heard. So with that said, that some of these changes we'll present today. We've developed kind of a narrative for each strategic focus area, which provides a context as to why it's important to CA to be a strategic focus area. We've also combined, per the board's request, we've combined identity and community engagement into one strategic focus area. Some previous objectives that the board maybe wanted to see become more aspirational, or some metrics included some previous objectives. That has happened to, and they have become actions under different objectives. And then we've developed a specific strategic focus areas for technology and data transfer.
When do you want questions? As you go, or do you want us to hear your presentation and then wait till the end?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment, but we will be reviewing each of these focus areas today. We want to spend about, give or take, about 10 minutes with our 60 minutes on the agenda here, about 10 minutes for each component. That's 5 strategic focus areas, as well as the mission and vision.
So what I'd like to recommend is you go through each strategic focus area. When we get to the end of it, the board will have an opportunity to ask questions and have some discussion on each particular area.
Okay. On that note, we will also be back here in 2 weeks. Today, the goal is to kind of present and get final comments on these objectives and actions and strategic focus areas. And we will be back here again in 2 weeks to present the actual draft plan. We are on a very tight timeline for this plan. So we will be reviewing this draft plan on March 28th with the board, and then back on the 11th to present the final strategic plan. So today is an opportunity to ask some questions, provide some comments. What we'll do is take this back tomorrow and get this turned around for an internal SLT review next week. CA staff SLT review. So by the time we come back on the 28th, it will incorporate comments heard from the board and any comments heard from the SLT. We have had slight feedback on a couple of the actions, and some of that was reflected in a resident speak out today. We understand that we need to wordsmith some of these items. Some may not be possible to include as an action, and we're here to hear that today. This is, like I said, it's a living document, and we want to hear those, and we will we'll get those in there as feasible. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Deepa here, and we're going to go through each of the strategic focus areas first, I believe, and then we're going to touch on the mission and vision once we've reviewed everything.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everybody. So the focus of tonight's meeting is for us to collectively review the objectives and the actions. So dividing the hour that we have into 6 parts, we'll spend about 10 minutes for each strategic focus area. That's 50 minutes, and then the last few minutes to finalize the mission and vision. And what we hope to take away today is sort of final comments on this. As Andrew mentioned, next week we will be developing the draft plan. So we want to make sure that we have heard everything that you have to say. We are in agreement collectively as the board, so we can move forward with the draft plan. So beginning with the first strategic area, which is identity and community engagement. Okay, I think you're going to have to see a bit more. Okay. So if we could, we'll go, several of these strategic focus areas have objectives. So we'd like to go through each objective with its set of actions and get comments. So we'll sort of parse it into smaller pieces that's a little easier to discuss. So the first objective here under the community identity section is to build and maintain trust and open dialogue between CA and its 10 villages, its community partners, and its residents. So for that objective, we have about 6 or 7 actions, and we'd like to get your feedback. If you want to take a minute to review the actions and then comment on any one in particular, we'd be happy to
See, Alan's
hear
hand
that.
up first, so Alan, you get the first crack at it.
You had the unfortunate situation that I was on a train for 8 hours yesterday, so I had an opportunity to really look this over. Did you really mean in the first one biannual rather than semi-annual? Every 2 years sounds like an awfully long time frame to get with the village managers, village chairs, and village boards. So that's my thought. That doesn't mean everybody else has that thought. I want to emphasize what is going to show up in a couple of places, what Joel Hurwitz said. We got to really be careful of not telling the villages what to do, codifying and formalizing the role of villages. Villages are separate corporations. We have no business telling them what their role is. We can offer support, we can offer a relationship, but we can't codify and formalize their role.
Okay.
That's what I got.
How would you sort of propose that we reword that particular?
Say strengthen the relationship with villages.
Hey, Alan, can I add something?
Of course.
Yeah, sure. So I want to say, I think it should just come out. They already have hold up meetings with village managers, whether it's semi-annual or whatever. I think they've got that in there. I don't think you need codified and formalize the role. I think that can just come right out. You're already engaging the villages.
Keith?
Okay.
Are you good? Done?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I looked at this, the objective made sense to me. What I'm wondering about is the detail of the actions, because it seems really just into the weeds almost in terms of, okay, we're going to hold these meetings, which doesn't seem like a board level thing to say that we're going to do and to check off, or like strengthen partnerships with community organizations such as that one stood out to me as something that would be underneath, as an action. And then what I would expect is that the staff would come up with the ways that are appropriate to do that and then report back on how that's occurred. So I'm just wondering what the direction is or the thoughts are on that.
Are you suggesting that the sub-bullets, the white bullets, are not necessary? Are those two down the weeds?
Some of them are, in my opinion. Throughout the document, some of them are and some of them are not.
Can I add something to what Keith just said?
Could I, did you guys want to respond to the comments?
Yeah, so I guess there are two schools of thought on this. When we look at a strategic plan, it's sort of setting the direction and the vision for the next 5 or 10 years. And oftentimes, when you just stop at the objectives and they're sort of broad and all-encompassing, there's no, what shall I say, direction. There's no clear direction on how this is going to be done. And so when we talked with staff, when we talked with the stakeholders, it was evident that we needed more specifics in terms of being able to effectively implement the plan going forward. So just stopping at the objective stage is going to just, again, raise the question on how are we going to achieve this objective? And these bullets answer those questions. Yes, some of them are in the weeds, but that's sort of the nature of a plan that's implementable, where you can hold certain entities responsible in a certain timeline to keep it going and to achieve your mission. That's the thinking.
Bill, Karen, Keith, and Sky. Bill?
Okay, just 2 quick points. When I read this, I thought the objectives were the darkened bullets and the actions were the ones that are, that's how I read it. So I thought it was 2 levels there.
Correct.
Okay. And then specifically with the codify and formalize action item, I thought that, and I think everybody's on board with changing that in some way, shape, or form, that taking out formalize the role of the villages, but say formalize CA's role in engaging with the villages, and then some language saying and standardizing throughout Columbia the villages' roles with CA, because I think right now some villages have one opinion of what their role is and others have another. And we need to have consistency in order to work with all 10 villages. That speaks to fairness and you know, that's something that we can actually, you know, get some teeth and work on over the next 5 years. So that's my recommendation for that particular action item.
Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah. How do I know I'm successful at this? What is my baseline? That's my biggest issue with this particular objective, is that it sounds nice. The action items seem good, but what is the baseline? Why am I building and maintaining trust? What do I have right now, and what am I trying to get to? I don't see any of that in here, and I don't, we
The
haven't.
strategic plan will not be the place for that.
Then what's the point of the strategic plan?
It's to give you direction in all areas.
But I won't know if I'm successful. How do I know if I'm successful at this?
Okay, so at the end of this document, in the draft plan, you will have what we call an implementation table that'll identify all of the actions, and it'll help you determine the status of each of the actions for a given period of time. So every 6 months or every year, you can go back and determine how much of that action was completed, and it's an action tracker.
Are we considered successful if the actions were completed or if the objective was accomplished?
Right, exactly.
It's the actions, that the actions were completed.
But my objective should be to make improvements in what I have. This is what, I think this is what we really talked about in the last session, is I want to go someplace, right? Why am I bothering to talk to the villages? Why do I need to maintain trust with them? What is the overall purpose of doing that? There must be some reason for me doing it. It feels very nice, meetings are lovely, but at the end of the day, what's the point of it? Where do I want to take this organization over the next 5 years? And this does not tell me that.
So Karen, is the concern that we could do all the actions and still not meet the objective?
Yes.
So I think that's the key concern is we've got a whole bunch of actions here, and you could technically do them all, but does doing them all equal we met the objective, or could you do them all and not meet the objective, or could you do something to meet the objective?
Right. If I hand this to the new CA president and I say these are your goals, if I were that new president, I would be having a field day, because you will never be able to measure me. You'll never know whether I'm successful with this organization. I can just say to you, yeah, we had all the meetings with the villages. Good job. You've done your job. I don't think that's sufficient.
I'm not sure what else we would need to include.
Tell me, when senior leadership gave you this objective, why did they give you this objective? What did they think was wrong? What did they think needed to be improved? Are we not talking to the villages? Do we have a cold relationship with them? Is there something about, I'm just going to throw this out there, they don't like the management contract. What is going on with the villages that I need to hold semi-annual meetings with them?
Okay. We have that documented in the stakeholder reviews, right? So some of these issues have come up in the past in the different meetings that we've attended, and those will be documented and produced as a separate, I guess, appendix to this plan. The strategic plan will not contain details of internal issues. That's just not how a strategic plan is designed.
No,
But you will have all of that backup information because these actions are coming from somewhere.
Right.
There's a reason why they're
I want to see
included.
measurable results. In other words, I've built and maintained trust. And so then what does success look like? That's what I think is missing from this and all the others. I don't know what success looks like. I say to Susan, I want you to make CA affordable and accessible. What does that look like? Okay. Right now, 25% of our residents are members. I want to see that increase. So success might be we go from 25% to 50% of our residents now become members in our facilities. So my objective was to be affordable and accessible, and now I've increased. That's a really good measurement of whether I'm successful.
So a strategic plan is not a measurement plan. That is probably the next step. I think we're listening to two schools of thought here. One board member who mentioned that this was getting too much into the weeds. And what you're saying is one step further, where every one of these actions needs to be, there needs to be a mini plan for these actions on how they're going to be executed, when they're going to be executed, how they're going to be measured.
You don't have to tell me how it's going to be executed. You don't have to, if I say to Susan, make it affordable, accessible. And then the staff says, okay, we're proposing that we're going to increase membership. That's a percentage.
I think we're talking about a strategic plan versus a tactical plan.
I'd like to get some other people in.
I apologize.
So Keith,
I spoke already.
Sky?
Yeah, I think any of the actions that have numbers associated with them or probably too much detail. For example, biannual meetings, if you would say hold meetings, then it would be up to the staff to decide how many meetings are required. And I see this strategic plan as being the what and not the how. The how and the recipe and the details would be for the staff to figure out and implement. Is that kind of okay?
That is a tactical plan, which this is not a part of. This is a strategic plan that guides the tactical plan. That would be the next step for staff to do.
Okay. I still think some of these action items are too detailed, and I think others agree with me as well.
Andy?
Yeah, just a couple things. First, I think some of the recommendations you see here are because some of the villages believe that our communication isn't as good as it should be. And so they would like to see particular things like, yes, we should have a meeting with the village managers or village chairs documented that says that should be an action. We should host at least 2 annual events a year in different villages. It's the talking of, well, let's kind of get the focus away from, let's say, centralizing everything at downtown, but going out to different villages. So the thought there is, yes, we should, one of the ways to build trust and open dialogue is to get out into different parts of the community. And so an action that says, you've got to host some events outside in different villages, I think is a good action. Regarding the role of villages, I would put in, encourage the villages to work together to document the role of the villages, because I think, as Bill said, there is a lot of unclearness about what the villages and what their roles are and things like that. And perhaps if all the 10 of them could get together and work it out, it might behoove us in the future to have more of everybody having the same kind of understanding. So I think that as an action item, and it's not for us to do it, but it's for us to encourage the villages to work together and come up with something. Holding the annual stakeholder event, yes, because that's so. If you don't put it in the plan, it's going to get lost. But those are the things I think. I think some of these are pretty good, and are the types of things that if the villages see that they're in there, it's going to start building trust and open the communication.
How will you know?
Dennis had his hand up.
Dennis feedback, village feedback.
So a couple comments. One is that not every goal is going to have a hard objective number associated with it. Some of these are soft goals and objectives. And from my perspective, I think the board should focus on the objectives and less on the action items, because those are going to be evolutionary. I'm sitting here 3 years from now, are we going to have the same list of actions that is part of this? No. It's going to be completely different. So when a president comes in, he's going to sit down and work with staff and the board and create those create those actions that answer to the objectives. This is to think, and some of the things, certainly on the budget, you can have a discrete number. Some of these, it's like you're going to know it when you get there. And I think some of that's going to be trust.
So I got Alan and Bill. Alan?
You had called on Keith earlier.
Well, yeah, you called him Keith.
He passed.
I know, I passed that time.
So I got Alan, then Bill, then
So
Dan.
I have some questions for my fellow board members and a couple of comments. Keith, you talked about these I forget your exact words, but these don't feel like board level stuff. Do you see this plan as a board plan, a staff plan, a organization plan? I'm curious because I'll just say, I see it as both, as all of us, so some of it isn't going to be board level. So I was curious about the genesis of that comment.
So I agree with Dennis, and that's the reason why my comments are coming as they are, because these items underneath here as actions, I don't believe that the majority of them we should be focusing on. That to me is a staff level plan of how we're going to achieve the build and maintain trust, because over the period of 5 years, how you do that may very well change. You might go from 10 villages to 9 villages. There's all sorts of, I'm just joking, or more. But I just think we're combining what I would want to see in the direction that I would want to take at a board level with what I would see as a plan of execution. So now, if the staff wanted to, produce their plan and to make it public, that's totally fine. But I don't necessarily want to hold. I wouldn't believe that the board should be holding the staff accountable for having biannual meetings, having at least 2 annual events at a year at the village.
I hear you. So if we don't, though, then I'm more with Karen, that then we have to figure out how do we measure the objectives, because if it's not by the actions, then we have to have some way of knowing that whatever actions are happening are bearing fruit. So
can I kick back on that a little bit? Because I agree. I was just going to say I agree on that, and and I agree with what Dennis was saying in the sense that I don't know that we can have specific measurables on all of these, but I think we have to flesh it out a little bit so that we can at least have the ability to have staff give us a narration of, well, what did you accomplish this year relative, or what did you accomplish this quarter relative to moving
and how do you know? Because how do you know that you did? Because even when we do, I deal in soft stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. And we still use the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, or we use other employee engagement surveys, or whatever it is, to see what kind of progress people have made. Bill, I'm not sure I like Andy's tweaking of what you said, Bill, around encouraging, because I don't think we can, if the villages say, no, we don't want to standardize, we can't get them to standardize. And I think why these are here, Andy, though, is because the consultant basically talked with people who are tactical and not with the board. So we're getting a bunch of tactics, and that's fine, but that's not strategic. So I think that's why those are there. And I guess I'm with you, Keith, to a certain extent, but I think if these are going to be part of a strategic plan, I don't want to see things in the strategic plan that are none of our business, or that have us as a board voting for something that can't happen or shouldn't happen. So I think we do need to look at those.
The other concern I have, I'd like to get in here just quickly, is that, this is something we're voting on for the next 5 years. So to assume that these actions are going to come and go, I don't think is a correct assumption. Because this strategic plan we vote on, it becomes our plan for the next 5 years. It gets published in the budget every single year. It's a thing that we use as a tool. And I don't think it's a fair assumption to say, oh, these actions are going to change, because it's a 5-year strategic plan. Bill, then Keith. Bill?
Okay, yeah, thank you. A couple of responses here really quick. Alan, I agree with both you and Andy. I think that the encourage is good language, and I'm glad that we're moving forward on that objective. I think we've improved that particular action item. Secondly, as we drill down from overall plan to objectives to actions, as we get to actions, we're approaching tactics, so I can see how this can bleed over, and we just need to be careful and respectful of where that line is. It's not easily seen, but that's where we're moving towards when we get down to action items, so just everybody be cognizant of that. And secondly, just to all my fellow board members, if you have a way to measure something or you want to improve this, then I would suggest that we get it out on the table and we work through that. If we don't have in our own capacity a way to express how to measure something, and to just say, well, you guys figure it out, I want something measurable, I think is not really respectful of the process that we've had here. I think that people put a lot of hard work in this, and to just throw it up and say, well, this doesn't do what I want, is not very helpful.
Keith?
I disagree.
Okay.
Because we're going to provide feedback, and then it's a responsibility to come back and provide what we are looking for. I have a full-time job. I'm not going to go through and figure out how to do all of this stuff, right? So I think we provide feedback, and then it gets edited. So a strategic objective, and I think what you said is it's a philosophical conversation, is what it sounds like. We're coming at it from one direction, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I'll make up a simple one in terms of engagement. Let's say employee engagement is to what Karen was saying, employee engagement is the thing that we're going to be doing, and we want to improve employee engagement over the next 5 years. Okay, and then if you want to use a survey to measure employee engagement, then that becomes the tool that we're going to measure to see if we're making satisfactory improvements. And then the actions underneath there are going to change year to year, because depending on the success of the engagement that we're having, the staff at that point may decide to move the needle or do different things in order to accomplish that objective. That's where I was coming from in terms of and I don't know that's a perfect one, but I just wanted to give an example of a direction, a survey, and then why the actions need to change.
I guess my point is, if the actions are changing, then they shouldn't be in this document.
Yeah.
Because this document is a 5-year document. So anything that's changing year to year shouldn't be in this document. It should be in a different document, but not this document. So the question I have is, would it make sense to get rid of all the actions and just focus on the objectives, and then something below it within the objective says, okay, if this objective is met, what does that look like? What change does that create? That make more sense?
Yes.
Sky?
Yeah, I think you said this was a living document. Did you say this was a living document?
Until we vote on it.
Okay, it's
No, even after.
I remember months ago, we looked at our current strategic plan, and there were some qualification statements. Did we all meet that goal? Was it low, medium, or high priority, and did we meet it just barely or pretty much, or were we really, really successful? Do you remember that? And I assume that when you all started this, that you sought information from all the stakeholders, but that you also looked at the current? Okay.
Yep.
Good.
We use that as our baseline. And in just reviewing that, we found that it was hard to determine how much was accomplished because there were no actionable items on there. Again, if it stops at the objective level, it's how are you going to determine how far into that objective you've gotten 2 or 3 or 5 years later, which is why we have actions that are not super specific, but enough to provide guidance to meet that objective.
It sounds like we feel that the action items are too specific, and you feel that they are not. Is that what everybody is kind of thinking of?
So I'll get Dan in next. Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to make two kind of clarifying comments, if I could. The first is, there was a comment made that about staff, why staff had put something here. This does not resemble what senior leadership had pushed forward. I think this is probably an amalgamation of all of the feedback. But to further clarify and more affirm, in past organizations that I've been with, you have the solid bullet point of the objective, and then underneath the open circles are more if you need to clarify that. But the board has a mechanism each year when the president and CEO sets their objectives to set the measurables for the given year on how we're going to work towards that, because this is a 5-year plan. And laying them out here really kind of locks the board and staff in from the ability to adjust and achieve things later down the road. Because as we learned in the last 5 years, a lot can happen. And so there are opportunities every year to set objective, measurable goals.
Can I give Dan a touchdown? I thought that was a really good comment. Touchdown for
Dennis
Dan.
wanted to get in.
So what I was going to say is that I believe under this one that most of these comments probably came from the villages. And we all would agree with the objective. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at the action items and how they're written, it gives you a sense of where they think we are. Mm-hmm. And tells us where I think we need to go. But they're not from the SLT or from the senior team. They're likely from, because.
Yeah, I just want you guys, when I said that, I was just like, I was trying to ask, why do we have this objective? So if so I hope you guys don't take offense on that.
Sky?
Yeah, just, wouldn't we put most of our measurements in the tactics as we approach these under these strategies here?
I think that's what Dan just suggested.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we really, if we had a strategy to reduce greenhouse gases and reduce water consumption, we wouldn't be putting in the meters in our strategic plan. But we would look at the meters to figure out what we were doing, right? I mean, so I could see action items under that particular thing if we were doing something hypothetical of we're going to install solar panels, we're going to, upgrade our fleets to electric vehicles. And you say, well, that still doesn't measure anything. All you do is purchase things. But then you would find the tactics to find the metering for those particular items that were purchased to say these, in fact, did reduce our emissions. And then you can say we are then successful. So I think that we need to marry this with a tactical plan. If we're looking at just a strategy, I think we should look at the strategy, and then the follow-on is to develop the tactics in order to realize those strategies.
Sky, then Alan, then I've got a comment. Sky?
Yeah, it seems as if we're of two minds. One is the objectives are the all-important goals, and the actions are how we go about successfully meeting the objectives. And either these actions are recommendations or suggested things to do in order to meet the objective, and others may feel that they are requirements, that if they are all met, then the objective is met. And Karen, you said that it's possible to complete the actions and yet still not meet the objective.
Yeah.
So I think we need to choose which one of those three should be a reality.
I really just, sorry, Alan, go ahead.
So I would say, partly because we've taken half an hour to do one objective under one of the 5 areas, 6 areas, I would say take the actions out, because my problem is, if I as a board member are being asked to vote on this, then I got to make sure those actions, even if they're going to change later, are okay. And that means I got to get into the weeds. But if we take them out and focus on the objectives, then I think we can do whatever editing we need and then vote on that. The second is, I think, Bill, to take your analogy, we would still have a goal at the high level. We're using X amount of kilowatt hours of electricity right now, we want to reduce that to Y. And so we have that as an overall measurable goal of some kind, that then we would do all those sub-activities and sub-measurements to see if we got there. So I think we still need some kind of measurement at the higher level.
So what I'm hearing is that there's a fair amount of consternation about the actions themselves. So the question I have for the board is, would people generally be in favor of just removing all the actions?
Nope.
I'm okay with that.
So I just want to take a show of hands. I mean,
And I think she said the actions could be in the tactical plan?
Well, the tactical plan is more detailed than what we have
Right now
here,
we're just
which is
discussing.
not part of what we're doing. That would be the
right
next
now we're
step.
just discussing a strategic
But we could put it into another document, so it is there for reference.
So can I get a show of hands who would be in favor of just striking all the white circle action items? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. And who would want to keep all the white circle action items?
Not keep all of them.
Well,
No, just keep them in general.
keep investing.
No, keep in general.
These votes to
sorry.
like define, it's not an all or nothing.
No, it's not, you're right.
Okay, so like, for instance, for me, what I would do is I wouldn't get rid of all the actions. I would say strengthen partnerships with community organizations such as blah, 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 blah. That, to me, seems reasonable. I don't remember the exact language, so I just said the encourage the village thing would be an action. Communicate with the villages with a sufficient time, for instance, could be, I think that's a communication action. And then I was thinking like a stakeholder item. It's like engage in a consistent fashion with stakeholders. And the reason why I say that is one thing I want to make sure everybody understands is from year to year, we may not meet all of the objectives. So we have to give ourselves the flexibility to say that we tried holding biannual meetings with the villages, and that didn't fix the problem. We didn't see any measurable movement. So we're going to try this other thing that may improve it, may not improve it, but we have to leave room in the plan for success and for trial and error to make some of these things come true. If the board is saying exactly, like Ellen said, that these are all the things that we have to do, that means that, yeah, we have to go in there and we have to assess, okay, let the board talk to all the villages and determine whether having biannual meetings is going to be the thing that's going to fix.
We'll never get through this list.
Right, it's going to fix the issue.
Just like we're not getting through this list tonight.
That's what but I think it's valuable, even as much as we said we weren't going to get through it. I think that high level, we're discussing conceptually what, then these things may be able to be applied to the rest of the items.
Karen?
Okay, so I just want to get clarification from Keith. So the white circle action items, you're okay keeping some of them? Because they all seem very prescriptive, and I kind of got the impression from your earlier comment that you didn't want that in there.
So in response, I don't want hold biannual meetings with village members, village chairs, all of those pieces. That's a tactic to me.
Anytime it says hold a meeting, you want to take that out?
If it specifies the amount of time and the method
Right.
for taking care of it, that to me is problematic.
And codify and formalize the role of villages should come out then.
So here's the problem I've got. We've got literally dozens of these white circle action items. I don't think we can go through each one.
We're not supposed to. That's the
tonight
point.
and try to go through this counts as strategic. This is not strategic. So we need sort of a higher level method of if we're going to keep the action items to be able to filter them appropriately. Andy.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I said we need some of the action items is I think what we need to do is take some of the basic action items and not make them so specific. So I'm going to give you an example. Under, the second one, encourage community participation. You could say ensure CA participation on county planning committees, for major events. You could say encourage Howard County to participate in CA's planning efforts. You can say strengthen the partnership between CA and the county. You're not specifying how, but you're specifying that that's one of the things you want to occur. Strengthen the relationship. So there's a bunch of these you can go through that you take the gist of what it is, but you don't get so detailed. Strengthen the partnerships, encourage the village to communicate. I mean, those types of things where you aren't specifying necessarily the down details, but you're saying, yeah, we want to strengthen our partnership with the county. We want the county to participate with us. We want And if you do that for a number of these, you still end up with the action items, okay, but they're at a little bit higher of a level than the details.
I think I'm understanding what you're saying. What we could do is we can take a stab at developing these and call them recommendations, not actions, because they're not so specific and they don't provide significant direction in how to do it. But at a conceptual level, it gives you some guidance on how to achieve the objectives.
Right, because that's what you need. You need some of the guidance. But you
So we
do it at a
can
higher
certainly
level.
go back and take a stab at that.
Yeah, Karen.
By the way, I want to say I like the objectives under this one.
Right.
I think the objectives are fine.
Karen.
Yeah, if they're gonna take a stab at it, can you guys, anything pertaining to where, like, we're telling the villages what to do, I would like that stuff to come out. I don't think we should say anything to the villages about how they run their elections or anything like that.
And I agree. I think generally, I agree with Keith. I think generally, maybe try to focus on just the most strategic actions, things that are very specific, things that are likely to change from year to year. If we can try to delete those, I think we'll be in a better place. I do want to hit the rest of the strategic plan, so could we go into the next strategic focus area?
Can I just say one general comment? Is that, keep in mind, just because we had the last 5-year plan and we never looked at it, doesn't mean that that's going to happen with this strategic plan.
Right.
So on an ongoing basis, we're going to be finding out, okay, what happened in this category that is meaningful and measurable, and did it have an impact? And, by the end of the year, we're going to review all of the items that we've been gathering up, and we're going to be able to determine whether we feel as a board that we've achieved what we need to achieve. And we may ask for measurements, additional measurements to prove it, or, whatever the case may be. So just.
Could we go into the?
One more.
I'd like to go into the next point.
Well,
Okay,
Go
if
to
we
the
can
next
move
point.
to the
This is a
next.
specific and general comment, so it'll cover others as well. On page 2, under the work to provide equitable opportunities,
Okay.
the second sub-bullet, you talk about the importance of diversity, which of course I support, and then you parenthesize and you put specific things. And later you do a similar thing with specific dimensions of diversity. I would suggest taking those specific things out, because if it's in the plan, then we're focusing on those. There are lots of other ways, in addition to those, that people are diverse and that we want to encourage diversity. So there's no need to, diversity doesn't just mean those
Right.
4 or 5 things. Diversity is a lot broader than that. So I would just suggest, and it shows up elsewhere.
I think at the last
I think that's a good
meeting,
point.
there was a request to sort of have diversity as a standalone.
That's not my point.
No,
That's not my point.
the point is that if you specify the exact
Dimensions
of diversity, if you specify ethnicity and you forget religion, then you've basically defined
You don't have
diversity as
sexual
ethnicity,
orientation,
but
you
not
don't
religion.
have,
So if you leave it all out,
disability, you've got
then
all
it's more
kinds of
flexible.
things. Right.
So, I guess generally, the idea here is that we're not focusing on specifics, but we're talking at more of a higher level,
Okay.
general philosophical sense. So if we can go into the second point, which actually is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So to open this one up, I know there's some discussion, and especially from Joel, who spoke out about this, about the first action item, reserving spots on the CA board for specific groups. I personally think that's a problem because we have elections, so you can't just have set-aside spots. Are there any further comments on that?
I would agree with you.
Agreed.
I think,
And we certainly can't tell the villages.
and we can't tell the villages how they're going to run their elections, so that village probably needs to be removed.
Yeah. And again, at the objective level, first of all, one thing I liked about the whole document is that, yes, there was a separate section, but you also, throughout the document, pointed out where diversity shows up. I like that.
I think that was one of the things we requested.
And the last objective in this one, again, you talk about ages, cultures, ages, income levels, languages, and genders. I would just say all people. Support programs and systems that provide opportunities and accessibility for all people.
Karen?
Yeah, I think that both the action items under ensure diverse participation in leadership roles, I think they should come out, both of them.
Which ones?
Both of those action items, both of those white bullets on the bottom of page 3. I think they should both, it should just say ensure diverse participation in leadership roles and just get rid of both of those.
Is it that you disagree with the second one? You think we shouldn't do it, or it's just too specific?
We're
for you?
already doing the second one.
Well, we already, CA already educates on the election process. They send out their emails, things like that. But I think that this is kind of, again, it's up to the villages how their elections run, right? And who's in leadership. But I think ensure diverse participation in leadership roles, honestly, that should be focused on the Columbia Association, on the senior leadership team and things like that. I don't see how we can, how CA can do that, how they can ensure diverse participation on village boards and things like that.
By how we educate and where you place. Sky?
I don't like the word ensure. I would rather have encourage.
Yeah.
It's a very good idea.
That's a good one.
Any other comments on this, Andy?
Yeah, I agree with the comments on the, about reserving spots. But the second one, actually I like, because I would like it to if you put it in terms of explain the operations of CA and villages to residents or help somewhere.
Okay, I'm
I
okay
think
with that.
that would be
okay with
a
that.
great thing that we really need to help the community understand.
So take out conduct meetings and just put explain, start with
Yeah, but
explain.
something to, I think there's a great idea to spread the word through the community so they better understand what we and the villages do.
Yeah.
And how to participate.
I agree, but
So I don't want to lose that.
I agree, but shouldn't that be actually in the first strategic focus area under identity? Just
I'll let that up to,
Okay.
I'll let that up to our consultants, but.
Bill.
I think that under this specific objective, there should be a role of advocacy for a diverse population for serving on the CA board. If for the next 50 years, people from Wild Lake elected people who look like me, that would, I'm not going to be here for 50 years, 2 years tops, I would say. But 2 more years tops. The idea that we would just allow that to perpetuate for decades or even for a single decade and say, well, that's just how it is. We should be at least advocating and say we should have a board that represents the entire community. We should advocate for that. I think advocacy is an important thing, and I think that would be the right role that we would have. We would not direct or reserve or anything like that, but we should be out there and saying, hey, we need this board to look like the community that it serves so that it serves it well.
Alan?
Yeah, so, hang on, Bill. I agree with Bill.
Hey.
Completely.
It happens.
Because I think that's that's how one doesn't ensure, but the way one does this is one builds the pool, one works the pond to develop it, to make sure everybody's aware of it, to make sure that we're fishing as wide and as deep as we can, so that then more diversity, and that's the more diversity, and then there's a more diverse pool for residents to choose from, because people are coming out. So that's our job is encouraging and advocating and educating.
Any other comments on this one? Should we go into the environment, number 3?
Yep.
So do the board members have any comments on the environment, strategic focus
The
area,
objectives.
environmental stewardship?
Who's in favor of the environment? Here's another specific one under second objective, first bullet at the bottom of page 4. You specify CA pathways, tot lots, and bridges.
Where are you?
Page 4, bottom, last thing on page 4.
Develop and implement, okay.
Where are you looking?
Very, very,
Page
very
4,
bottom. Last bullet.
Very last thing. It specifies pathways, tot lots, and bridges, but why not just say infrastructure? That way, if there's a building, or there's a tennis court, or there's something else that's could be impacted, we're also paying attention to that.
You can also use words such as, or for example, or et cetera.
Any other comments? So it looks like, what?
I think, I wanted to make sure it wasn't under the fiscal responsibility, because there's a lot of planning items there, but I guess I just didn't see the, watershed, is that?
I thought I saw,
That would be in this section.
that should be in this section.
It's-
That's the
Watershed.
stormwater?
There's a stormwater management
Stormwater
plan.
ends up
There's
in
watershed
on
management
page
too.
5.
Yeah. So
That's the third, I believe.
Yeah, there's
The
a.
third objective.
Under promote resiliency and environment, stormwater, and watershed management, there's that objective, and then there's 3 action items under that. Do those cover what you're thinking?
I don't think so. I need to think about that, because that's the one piece I felt was missing, so I can, when I was reading it, and I thought that there was something later on in the risk piece, but,
Keith, I think it's, if you look at page 5, I think what you're looking for is the 1, 2, 3, 4th white bullet.
Yeah, they
Work with Howard County's Bureau of Environment to develop a comprehensive stormwater management plan. Is that what you're thinking of? To control, because that's really watershed management, right?
okay.
Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have anything, if something comes to you tonight or tomorrow, if you have like something
No,
specific.
I guess the piece there is that felt like it was, like, that's Howard County. And in terms of like what our plan is or our strategy is, that I didn't feel like any of these really directed that.
Well, would it make sense to delete the work with Howard County and just say, develop a comprehensive stormwater management plan? Doesn't really matter how you do it, or
Well-
who you're working with, just need to do it.
Alan's before me, but I have some.
I'll get Karen then Alan.
Okay, I'll just be really quick. Howard County's water falls on our land. That's my only comment.
I think it's pushed on our land.
I think when you develop that stormwater management plan, it will have to be in coordination with the county.
And a lot of our problems are their fault.
But if we could build a massive pump on our land that took all their water and just evaporated it magically, then we wouldn't have to work with them.
Yeah, I think the only way to do it comprehensively is to work with the county and other landowners. And I guess
disagree, yeah,
as
but-
long as what's in here speaks to what we've heard resident after resident talk about in terms of we've got to do, I know we say we've tried, and I don't deny that we've made lots of efforts, but runoff, what happens at Lake Elkhorn in Lake Elkhorn Branch is caused by other water coming in there. And we got to work out on that water.
How much time do we have?
So that's the comprehensive part.
Yeah, I think that we have to work with the county to have better regulations too, so that we can actually get some enforcement as far as getting this water to slow down. And that, we can't write a water management plan that says have better enforcement mechanisms when we don't have the police or the sovereign power to create enforcement mechanisms.
Andy?
And the other thing too is, it just does not make a sense for us to do our own water management plan independent, because so much of what happens in the county is affecting us. It's not necessarily our land. If we controlled it all, we wouldn't have a problem. But it's like, it's kind of silly not to think like, Howard County has got to be involved.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any good to develop a plan that ignores them or doesn't get the report.
It doesn't do any good to develop a plan that's just focused on them either.
Yeah, you got to include them.
That's all.
I feel like we're getting a little tactical here.
Yeah, and we'll go back and wordsmith
I
some
feel
of these.
like
How about working with Howard County to develop a comprehensive storm?
we might have to work with the state too. I mean, that's where it's getting tactical. Like, okay, we say Howard County, what about the state? We got to work with the state too. We got to work with the villages also. So at this point, it's getting
What
tactical.
about the residents, the commercial enterprises?
I mean, we can't list it all.
Right.
So that's why it's getting tactical.
Correct.
So I feel like when we get to the point where we're listing things and we try to list everything, then it becomes hopeless.
We'll go
because
back and
it's tactical.
take a stab at that.
I'm fine with a such as, develop a comprehensive and
Such
such
as.
as, and throw in Howard County, but I just don't think
But when it becomes limiting, that's where it becomes an issue. Any other comments on the environment? In that case, do we have comments on the fiscal responsibility? I actually have a couple comments on this. One, we have an action that says strive for CA to show an increase of net assets of at least 500,000. I'm looking back at past budgets. Our increase in net assets have been in the several millions. So the question I have is, why such a low bar here?
Well, you got to start somewhere. I mean,
we're already like,
we could pick,
we're already like an order of magnitude higher than this.
if you want a higher number.
I was just wondering where that number came from.
Was that a staff piece?
I don't remember that specific number coming up, but we can look at that.
It's not the
Yeah.
kind of thing that I would have thought a village.
We have that information, but again, I think we'll probably remove that if we're going to go, to a higher, more general level, that number will do away with.
Alan?
Under explore opportunities to make cities programs more affordable, you have explore and diversify revenue streams. And I'm wondering, I'm not sure where that came from. We have our assessments, we have our programs. Do we have a sense of what diversify might look like? Where the opportunities are to diversify? Or is that,
I'm not sure which.
maybe that's a Susan question, I don't know.
I didn't.
I know you didn't write it, I'm just wondering, I was wondering what,
Really.
but do we have,
Well, if you want to talk about how we would do that, is that what you're asking?
is that, is that even in the realm of possibility that we have?
I guess the question I have is, even if we did that, how does that make CA's programs more affordable?
Well, if we got a grant to fund something, then the grant funds people, that doesn't have to come out of their pockets.
Well, assuming it's a grant that's funding people, if it's just a general grant that goes into CA and the membership rates are still the same, the affordability hasn't
That's what the
changed.
grant is for. So, I mean, there are ways to do that.
So I was going to say, there are always new programs and ideas that are out there. Some of them are a good fit for CA, some are not. And there's a thing called Cooper Tracks, which is a new program that speaks to cardiovascular health and overall wellness. That is a pay program for some and a subsidized program for others. But that's something different.
Bill?
Yeah, I think that the revenue streams that the Columbia Association has had up until now have served the corporation well. But if we're going to be looking to move beyond our current, $8 to $10 million capital improvement plan, 3% growth, maintaining existing facilities, not expanding or improving, worrying about the ability to renovate and update facilities, we're going to have to find a way to redo our revenue streams. And I think it's important to have this in here so that the board is, when reading the strategic plan, is being creative and trying to understand where additional revenue opportunities may be, and not just stick to the rote lean and membership program, because it's getting to the point where we're not being able to do much more than just subsist from year to year. We're going to have to find different places for revenue, and that's going to be an important part of how this organization works in the future.
Keith?
Susan, you made a comment just now that you didn't know about this. Were you involved in developing these targets? Because, and the reason why I'm asking the question is typically CFO is looking at the overall organization and saying these are sensible things that we need to do in order to put the organization in a good place to be able to do X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. Is that baked into here?
I don't recall being in this level of detail of participation. Is that my?
Keith, I gave some of those. Some of these I read here, I gave.
Oh, you gave?
Yeah.
I think there's
feedback.
it's a combination
Yeah.
of folks, you folks, senior leadership,
Yeah.
the stakeholders, some folks from the board.
So I had part two.
If there are specifics, that's where
Part two?
it came from.
Okay.
So I think, rather than bringing all the things that were provided as input, we need to understand the sense of what those are trying to accomplish, and then to work with staff to figure out, okay, with these things, what are some targets that we may need to have in terms of, our funding stability or, even the income streams or whatever it is. But I think that the staff needs to provide that type of guidance, not just a listing of all. Andy, if you put that number in there, that's fantastic that you provided feedback, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the CFO thinks that that's an appropriate measurement of success for the organization, right? No offense to you, but we've got talent. And then I just wanted to highlight, because I really like this one, develop innovative strategies for CA to compete in a market that is competitive with a changing population, such as providing new fitness venues, pools, and apartments, all of those pieces. I'm not sure I agree with the, all of the items that we want to highlight as examples necessarily, but this to me is something that we're going to say, all right, staff, team, go back and tell us how you're going to make this happen and then report on that on an ongoing basis. And that to me is a very strong directive from the board.
How would we put pools in apartment buildings?
That's what I'm saying. I didn't like that.
That's why I got confused.
Yeah, no, the examples that were there might not necessarily be the examples we want to highlight, but the idea of developing innovative strategies for CA to compete in the market that is competitive and in a changing population, and then come back and tell us how you're doing that. Let us know what you're planning to do this year to implement that, and then we'll follow up and see how successful those things were.
I'll have you.
Yeah.
So the other comment I have on explore opportunities to make CA's programs more affordable for residents. The two bullets here, I don't actually see promoting affordability at all. So the first bullet is basically continue doing what we're currently doing. That's not making anything more affordable, it's just status quo. I would think if we had a goal of an objective of making things more affordable, we'd have actions like be able to reduce the annual charge, be able to reduce resident membership rates. That's sort of the vision, not just do what we're currently doing. Any comments on that?
Well, I kind of read that as to ensure that we continue to do a discounted.
It says more affordable, not.
Okay.
That shows that we're moving the needle somewhere.
Yeah, I don't want it to go the other way.
Can we?
I want to make sure that, yeah, you can move the needle the other way.
No,
I want to make sure that we maintain a
Well, the objective doesn't
difference.
The objective doesn't say less affordable.
So, Eric, we've hit our 60 minutes on this.
Okay, but can I get another 15 minutes? Any objections for another 15 minutes to get to the rest of it?
I object. I'd rather wrap it up because I think we've provided the feedback that we generally need. I mean, there's a couple of comments, but
I'll take a vote.
Well, I just want to say, I have some severe problems with the mission statement that I'd like to talk about, so if I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about
we
the
haven't
mission
even gotten
statement.
to that. So are there any objections to an extra 15 minutes?
yes, because 15 minutes is not going to cover the mission and vision.
It's not going to cover it, but it'll let us know,
Okay,
put us on notice.
I won't object.
Okay, thanks. We'll have another 15 minutes. Bill and Alan, then we'll get to the mission vision.
Just really quick, when you're looking to make things more affordable, then maybe, we need to think outside the box more. And that's what I read as what we're doing here. Maybe we need to come up with another membership tier that is more affordable, but maybe doesn't provide everything that the current play and fit and play tiers have. And thereby allowing more people to participate, but maybe in a slightly different way. That's something to consider. That's something to debate. That's something to, that should be part of what we should be doing in the future is how do we get more people to participate? Is that one of the options that we want to consider? I'm not saying that that's a plan. That's something to consider. And that's what I think this speaks to.
Well, I think the main bullet speaks to
Sky's
it.
got her hand up.
I got it. I think the main bullet speaks to it, but what we're missing is the action items that you discussed. Sky?
You can also make memberships or things more affordable by decreasing the number of amenities.
Karen?
Yeah, I was just going to say is one of the things I would like to see is in this, if we're going to have like some of these action items here is explore ways to make more services and amenities included with your annual charge. Right now, the only things included with your annual charge are open space and the play areas. You don't, after that, there's nothing. So, I mean, I know that only 3 people voted with me last year, but I think that the summer pools and the swim center should be included as part of the annual charge. And so I think that should be, those are the types of things that we should be exploring to increase participation, and that would decrease rates of memberships at all levels.
Bill?
Karen, that's a $7 million hole that we would have to fill.
It's a $2 million hole.
It's a $2 million hole for the movement of fit and play plans. People would not pay for those plans anymore.
Right.
Plus the operating cost of all the pools, plus the induced cost of people who bought the.
We're talking about a specific idea.
We're getting like very tactical here.
Yes.
We're supposed to be discussing the strategic
problem is
plan.
that it's this free pools and it's a very easy thing to do, and it has been proven not to be. And it needs to be mentioned that it's a $7 million problem. It's not merely moving it over into the.
The question I have is, if it's so hard, why can Ruston do it?
Okay. I'll tell you what, Eric. I drove through Reston last Saturday, and they have 25-story buildings in downtown Reston. And I'll tell you what, they are making bank, huge coin on all of that downtown property. And that's probably how they subsidize their pool. So if you're willing to sit down and tell the county, hey, we want 25-story buildings in downtown so we can make free pools,
Could we?
I'd like to see that's not going to fly.
Wait, can we get back to the main?
You brought it up, sir. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that might be a strategic item to put this to rest once and for all, is just to do an analysis of Reston so that we don't have these debates on these one-off comments. And to support Karen, I'm not 100% in agreement with you, but I think that that's an innovative strategy that we need to sit down and talk about whether that's feasible. And I don't know where it's been proven or not, but I haven't seen that. There's no document that demonstrates to me.
We're going to pay down some debt in a couple years that we could use to pay for this.
But that's the kind of analysis I believe that we need to do and decide as a board. Is that what we want to do?
I guess the point is, we obviously can't debate pools here, but what we can do is lay the framework to say that this type of thing, making things more affordable, whether it's reducing rates, including more amenities in the annual charge, reducing the annual charge, is a direction.
Amenities was another idea.
For reducing amenities, but the idea is, what are the ways that we can make our residents' bills go down? And obviously we can't talk about all the tactics. There's a million one strategies, million one tactics, million one options. That's not to debate today, but the question is this something that should be at a strategic level in the strategic plan? Karen, then Dan.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing. Every single resident, whether they're a renter or an owner, pays their annual charge. And they are subsidizing everybody who gets to go to the pool but them. Only 25% of our residents are members of any of our programs or facilities. So, Bill, when you get on your high horse and talk about we can't afford it, there's a lot of people I talk to who are sick and tired of subsidizing these amenities that they cannot afford to use. You know, we talk about this inclusive society, we want to have DEIB and everything, and it just feels like we go out of our way to make sure that they never get to participate, and you're not even willing to explore the fact that they might get to participate.
All I can say is
that's just my
2 years ago, there was a report that was put out that absolutely demonstrated that cannot happen.
I'd like to get Dan in.
It's written down.
Dan?
So I would just, when we talk about affordable, I think we're equating affordable automatically with cheaper and reducing cost. And I would just like to point out that between 1996 and FY 97 and FY 24, the average resident membership rate was 20%, increased 20% less than inflation increased. So there's relationships in there. So we have made it more affordable when you look at the big picture. So it's not just they are paying less. It's just in a different way if you don't look at that. So I would suggest the board would need to really truly define what affordable is. Is it just paying less than they are today?
Yeah.
Or how does it relate to inflation, which in fact, like I said, on average, some is.
I'll throw a different metric at you. What has the resident membership market share improved?
Oh, here we go. So you were banging the gavel like 2 seconds ago.
Alan?
I would just raise another possible metric, which is our discussion at a strategic level is, sort of goes along with what you were saying, Karen. What do we want the assessment to pay for? What, i.e., what do we want every resident to pay for as versus certain residents? And that's a philosophical discussion that I think the board can have.
Sky?
Besides the pathways and open space and the tot lots, there are other free amenities like Lakefront Live and a lot of those programs that, you know, are short in duration that we just don't think about. When the budget was being developed 2 or 3 years ago, the staff put together 3 scenarios. Scenario number 3 was free pools. And I'm trying to gather all that information and write 1 or 2 page summaries. But in essence, it would be exorbitantly expensive and was just not considered. And that's what you were thinking of.
That's correct, yes. Yeah, it's.
Any other discussion on the strategic objectives?
The last thing that it keeps on getting put out there, and I just want to make sure that there's at least one person out there that isn't necessarily feeling like I need to pay less in my annual charge. And I can say that there are a number of other people that I've spoken to about that. I think that how we engage and who we engage is the broader question. And it keeps on being said that everyone wants to pay less. And I don't know that everyone wants to pay less. I think that there's a value discussion that's on the table.
I think it also depends who you talk to.
That's all I'm trying to point out. I was just pointing another perspective.
Yeah. And from a strategic standpoint, Eric, that's a key that we all talk to a lot of residents, but we certainly don't talk to all of them. And we need to be cognizant that there are opposing views and other points of view that we may not have in our background or our experience, and we need to make sure that we're looking at that also.
Anyway, I'd like to.
Last point.
That was dismissive.
Sky has.
Anyway is dismissive.
Yes.
When you say anyway to.
Said anyway?
Yeah.
Sky has knocked on.
More of a discussion than a meeting.
So Sky has knocked on a ton of doors. She's talked to her residents. I've knocked on a ton of doors. I talk to my residents.
Yep.
I talk to all of them. So I think that some of us are out there trying to gauge how our communities feel. And I don't think that we're just talking out of turn here, Bill. I mean, if I go to your neighborhood, how many people at the Brook can actually afford to go to the pool that's right across the street from them?
Well, I can't give you an exact number, but I've been through the Brook several times myself. I've talked to many of my residents too, on a continuous basis. And here's the thing is that even when we were young, the pools were not free. They never have been.
The intention, though, was that they would be free one day.
The actual rate that our parents paid at that time was 75 cents per hundred, not 68.
We're getting
It was a $16 million loan hanging over the corporation.
But I'll say this. We come from 10 different villages with 10 very different setups, very different situations. I mean, I get emailed all the time. Why is my bill so high in July? I mean, I get that email all the time. So again, it depends where you're from and what the situation is. I would like to discuss the mission and vision quickly. Do you want to introduce the mission and vision to us?
There it is.
It should be at the top.
Yeah, sure. This mission and vision, there was some disagreement in our previous meeting, but this is kind of what we carried forward. The idea of a Columbia where everybody wants to be, welcome to be, and is happy to be. And then in the vision statement, we included Rouse's phrase of cultivating a Columbia, a dynamic, diverse, and inclusive garden for the growing of people. So that was the background from what we heard from the previous meeting, and we'll hear your comments on those now.
Alan?
Okay. It's my understanding, and while I'm not an expert, this is something I do with people, is that a mission is supposed to do 2 things. It's supposed to tell you what business you're in, and more importantly, perhaps, it tells you what business you're not in. It provides those guardrails to know when we're in our lane and when we're not in our lane. This mission, either one of these, and they seem totally interchangeable to me, build or make is irrelevant to me, harken back to our previous mission before this one, which was, and this is only a slight paraphrase, working every day in hundreds of ways to make Columbia a better place to live, work, and play. That used to be up there on the wall. And that's,
All right, Eric. What? Relax. What?
and that's what this is. There's nothing in either of these statements that says what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, what business we're in, what business we're not in. We could, under this, we could go out and give everybody in Columbia $100, because that'll make them happy. And then that could be something we do. I present you, and this was strategic, but it ended up being wonderful, the mission statement of the Johns Hopkins Federal Credit Union, which says that the mission of the Johns Hopkins Federal Credit Union is to provide its members with competitive, high-quality financial services while remaining strong, secure, and reliable in its operations. They're in that business, and it tells a little bit, the financial business, providing those services, and it provides some measure of they want to make sure they're strong and secure and reliable, so it gives them something to bounce off of.
That's not the new mission.
Well, it's what I got off your website.
Just saying.
It's what I got off your website yesterday.
I know. It hasn't been updated yet.
But even if that's not your new mission, it's a good statement. There may be better ones out there, but that provides them with some guidance. Neither one of these, and we go wrong in two ways when we have a mission statement like this. We either try to be everything to all people, and they make so many demands on us that we have no way of saying no, no grounds to say no, not to that, and yes to that, or it leads us to go into things that we ought to not be doing, and we start spending money on things that this corporation should not be doing. So I'm very unhappy with either of those two mission statements.
Karen?
Yeah, I guess I thought that when we finished the last session that we had said we wanted to go back to our origins, and this doesn't feel like we did that at all. It feels like we just got the same stuff that had already been presented to us the first time, and I think we had said things like create a garden for the growing of people as the mission statement, and because we wanted it to be simple, we wanted it to be repeatable, we wanted it to be in people's heads so that they knew what it was, and this just feels like we didn't get what we asked for at all.
But I thought we did that in the vision.
We said that the mission should be create a garden for the growing of people, and we said the vision should be cultivate a community for all residents to live, learn, work, and play. I think that was what we had said. Some semblance of that, that's my notes. It might not have been exactly that, but I feel like we didn't necessarily get that with this mission statement.
Keith? Yeah, well, a couple of things. We're going to have a leadership transition, and a lot of times a leadership transition brings with it a different idea of vision and you know, what that a new leader might be interested in bringing to the table. And I'm wondering if we need to just table the mission and vision as part of this plan and leave what we have in place and then revisit that part of the conversation when we have an opportunity to do that. And I was looking at those pieces, and everything that we've talked about tonight as being important to us is represented in those elements in a pretty meaningful way when we talk about, you know, where was the piece that has the evolving needs of a dynamic and inclusive community, right? Those pieces spell out that we have to be more inclusive from an affordability standpoint, an engagement standpoint. I just think that if we leave it alone, we're not doing ourselves any injustice. And I don't think that we're going to, from what I've seen so far, I don't think that we're going to come down to what we would think is a perfect element. And then, like I said, we have a leadership transition that's coming up, and we may want to think about deferring this and including that portion in a later conversation.
Andy?
I was going to say I like the vision statement because it does, because it says, you know, cultivate Columbia as a dynamic, diverse, and inclusive garden for growing the people, which gets you back to Rouse.
Well, we could.
I'm okay with the vision, it's the mission.
Yeah, it's a great vision.
It's the mission we don't
Take
like.
out cultivate. Our vision is Columbia as a dynamic, diverse, and inclusive garden for the growing of people. That's a great vision.
Well, and
But that's
Keith,
not a good mission.
And Keith, you talked about
I didn't say the mission, I just said the vision.
But I just wanted to touch back on what Keith said. So you basically talked about I think I recall you talking about the mission. So what we could do is keep the mission from the current mission and then just replace the vision.
I think that's a good vision up there, though. I like the vision. It's the mission we don't like in the proposed strategic plan.
No, I'm talking about keep that
our current mission.
Keep that mission, the one on the wall, and replace the vision with what we have here.
My only issue with that mission is it's not memorable. Most people don't know what it is. If you go out to Columbia and you asked any resident what our mission was, are they going to tell you that? That's why I wanted to simplify it. That was my only.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Keith?
The ACA.
Yeah, I think I don't see that, this is just a slight modification on what's up there, in my opinion, and I'd rather table this conversation, because I don't like the missions. The happy thing doesn't really work for me. I'm sorry, but the garden thing it feels a little bit, it feels a little dated in terms of visioning statements, and sorry to disagree. I want to agree.
That's okay.
But I'm joking, but I can disagree with the best of them.
Ellen?
My only concern with tabling is I'd want us to at least affirm that what we have works, because at least as I think of this, the strategies are to create are to live in the boundaries of the mission, and if we don't have a mission, then the strategies don't have any place to exist. It's like having a river with no banks. So I'm okay if we say we may or may not change our mission, or this is our mission until and unless a new leader says, I'd like to revisit the mission and modify it, but to have no mission doesn't work for me.
Any other comments on mission vision?
I'm not dying on that hill.
Any other comments on the strategic plan in general? I actually have one administrative comment. Instead of having black and white bullets, could you just number them so that we can refer to a specific bullet by A1 or A2?
So do we have consensus on the mission and vision?
I don't think we have much consensus at all on the mission and vision. What I see is that some people like the new vision. There's a lot of consternation about the two mission options, the way I see it. And there's also some board members that would just prefer to just keep what we currently have on the wall. Is that a sort of a fair read of the room?
The only thing you didn't say is that there are people, and I agree with Keith, I think it was you who said it, and I agree, that the vision written here and the vision on the wall are not that different. So there's not a lot of problem there.
So one option would be just keep what's on the wall. Save some printing costs.
Anybody have a problem with that?
Is there any objections to keeping what's on the wall?
I'm not going to die on this hill. Whenever everybody decides something, I'm with.
So I see no objections to keeping the current mission and vision statements.
This is always a healthy debate, any organization.
Yes.
Any other comments on the strategic plan in general?
I just want to be positive, because I really appreciate the work that's been done to bring all of the pieces together. The feedback that I think we're providing is just giving you a sense of, kind of how we'd like to see it organized so that we can manage it and measure it, and from that perspective. So please don't take all of this to be, this is terrible, let's throw it out. I think there's a lot of really great work, and I've seen how you've incorporated some of the feedback that we've been discussing. So I appreciate that.
And I take it another way. I think it shows that the board members all read through this, and they all care deeply about how this impacts the next 5 years. And the message I've always heard is like, if people aren't arguing back at you, it means they don't care. And so what we see is a lot of people that care very deeply about this community.
Yeah, and I'll third that and just say, I know my own personality, plus the task we had here as a board was to edit what you had and react badly to it. If we reacted positively to everything we thought was positive, we'd have been here all night and more. So there's a lot of stuff that we didn't, for me, anything I didn't talk about, I liked. So take that as a positive.
Andy?
No, I'll pass.
Okay. Thanks. That brings us.
I have a comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you have had the most difficult job to create something and to consolidate ideas from tens of dozens of people. And our job has been easier because we can just nitpick. I don't like this, I don't like that. Yeah, that's okay. So we really appreciate all the work that you've done.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you from the chair for all your work. We really appreciate it here.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to go into the purchasing policy. So that's 4B, item 1 is the CA purchasing policy.
So the staff wanted to bring this forward to primarily focus on
The second of the two changes, that was our initiative to ask for an increase, the approval to increase the threshold for competitive bidding. And the audit committee in their December meeting had approved a unanimous recommendation to make the policy as you have here. The wording is directly from the audit committee to clarify that the policies do apply to members of the board of directors. So that's what's before you. If you have any questions or any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
So could you clarify on the first part? Because I thought policies just applied to the entire organization, regardless of where you are in the organization. And policies are global, aren't they? I mean,
That was always staff and management's understanding, but the audit committee clearly didn't think that the policy reflected that as clearly as it should. So that was their initiative.
So I'll start with Keith.
Yeah, it's totally different than what the items that were in here, but when I was reading through this under 4C, so below that purchasing item, there's, I was trying to track all of these pieces, and there's some exception reporting down below, but the last item of the first paragraph, an invoice that exceeds the approved purchase order amount, including change orders, shall not be honored. When I read that sentence, and I was thinking about, because we have other exception policies later, exception reporting later on and rules, but if it's at the point of an invoice.
What page are you on, Keith?
I'm sorry, it's on page 6. 6 of the marked up copy. 6. You're at 4.
Roman numeral 4.
Roman numeral 4, and updated letter C.
Gotcha.
That's old D.
Addendum change.
Old D, updated letter C. Yeah.
Oh, so what would have to happen would be to look at the purchase order and how that would have to be approved to be changed.
So the only thing I was suggesting there is rather than say shall not be honored, because we're already at the point where we've, I'm assuming, have had a purchase order and it's being invoiced at this point for something, based upon the elements that are defined later on in terms of approvals. If we just said there, instead of say shall not be honored, shall be reported or something along those lines, because the idea that we're just going to flat out, not honor an invoice, that just.
Which might be work was already completed.
What's that?
It might be work that was already completed.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's an invoice at that point. So that was my only concern.
Ellen?
On the first page of the memo, there's a quote, and it's not clear to me where the quote ends. Where does the quote end?
At none, at the very bottom of the page.
Oh.
So that whole thing at none? Oh, I see. I see where you. Okay, so that's a quoting from the audit statement. Got it. So this is, I'm assuming, clearly aimed at the recent troubles and the board procuring outside counsel. So, as Keith said, there are exception policies. What is our current policy if the board decides we need to make an exception to a policy? Is it a 2/3 vote of the board?
I think it's
I'm not asking you, I'm asking somebody.
I think it's a majority vote.
Just a majority vote to change it
for that instance.
Do we have an exception policy?
I don't think we have a specific exception policy to policies.
Well, I know in past leads I've understood that, for example, when the board wanted to waive its 3-meeting rule, there was a specific requirement that had to be.
But that actually is in the policy, I believe.
Okay.
So there are certain supermajority requirements that are actually baked into policies.
Andy, put on your seatbelt. We're about to take off.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if it's just a general thing that doesn't actually have that supermajority built into the policy itself. I think it's just a majority vote. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Do we need to put an exception policy into this purchasing policy?
There's an exception policy. It's on page 10, item 9. Exceptions, which actually require board approval, conveniently enough. So it looks like the board can approve exceptions to the policy.
It says it can only be approved by the president.
B. 9B.
Okay.
Any requests for exceptions over $75,000 requires board approval. So it sounds like the board approves exceptions to this policy over 75K.
Well, no, any,
That's different though.
What?
That's just on the competitive bidding.
Well, over 75K, the board has to approve it. Under 75K, it goes to the president.
but if, as with the recent troubles, if the purpose, that would not work.
Right, I agree with Alan.
That would not work, but I believe so I guess the question I have is, if the board want to vote to, say, hire a consultant for the presidential search, which we did, how does that process change based on the suggestions to this policy?
It doesn't. You followed the policy when you hired the president's search firm.
So what's the difference between what we did with that versus?
Well, you went through a competitive bidding, you followed the policy.
Okay.
Right.
And if we have to have an exception, we have followed the policy with regard to an exception.
I'm sorry.
I mean, if we want to, say, make an exception, and that just says any exceptions over 75K would require board approval. So if we voted as a board to make an exception to this policy, then we're following the policy.
But what if it was for 50,000? But the president didn't agree.
How much did you spend during the troubles, as Alan likes to call them?
It's probably in the quarterly report somewhere.
It was in last year's budget, I'm sure.
It's in the quarterlies.
So, I was wondering, can you give me like 3 or 4 reasons why you would want to make an exception to the purchasing policy, Eric?
Oh, we've got exceptions all the time in the quarterlies. So there are, if you go to any quarterly report, towards the back, you'll actually see a list of exceptions to the purchasing policy. So you'll actually see purchases, and it's listed out. Some quarters there'll be 4 or 5 purchases under exceptions. Some quarters there's none. But almost every year there are half a dozen or so exceptions.
Right, I get that. That's, I mean, if there's a bidding process and you want to get 3 bids and you can only get 2, and it's been more than the expected time and you only get 2, you may want to have an exception. Or it might be a proprietary service, you may want to have an exception. I was wondering what the board exceptions would be. That's you seem to be very focused on the board having this exception power, and I was wondering, in what way would you like to use that?
It's not a request, it's already in the policy. We have I'm just reading, it's under 9B. I mean, the board has that power already.
Right, and it's a threshold limit as far as dollars, that's all.
I mean, and basically the idea is that you wouldn't necessarily want, you wouldn't necessarily want things that are like $1,000, $2,000 to go to the board every single time and they want to have an exception. So you wouldn't want the board to have to weigh in on every single exception. There are lots of them. So the idea is that the board is weighing in on the major exceptions, and by major, it's 75K in the policy. Susan?
So I was present at the audit committee meeting, but did not, again, this was not a staff initiative. I believe that the focus is not that that there already is the opportunity for the board to make and approve exceptions. I believe the intention of this was to make it clear that the policy applied to the board in general. And again, as you said, that was always the assumption of the staff, but the audit committee felt that it needed to be further clarified. And it's just made a very minor change to the policy. The very first sentence just adds the phrase, including the board of directors, to that. So that's all the clarity I can bring to the situation, but that's the way I understood.
I don't know why we need to make that change if we've been following the policy all along. The exception process has worked. I'm not sure what we need to.
I wouldn't necessarily say you've been following the policy all along, but it's always been the understanding that it did apply to the board.
When haven't we followed the policy since?
Well, do you want to talk about that now or in the open meeting? I'm not sure you would want to do that.
So
Andy says no.
You can talk about it theoretically, but you can't talk about anything that would be confidential.
It might have happened last year.
Or it might
So
not
is the
have.
board, I mean,
Or
I
it
just,
might not have,
I mean, I
yes.
just think that in certain cases, the board needs to act on its own. And so I don't know why that would be, I mean, that would just fall under the exception policy that Eric was talking about, right?
If the, no.
So I'd say, if the boards always follow the policy, why worry about the change, right? It doesn't change, if that was always the intent of the board, that doesn't change the policy's intent either. If the audit committee recommended it and they feel it's helpful, why would we not change it?
So, I don't see why we're changing something that does nothing.
Right.
Well,
That's why I'm confused.
there's some disagreement here about whether it does something. There's some people here that would say that it would do something.
Like what?
Well, I think,
Okay, what would it do?
well, the first, in response to that question, I think we, and if we can't talk about it now, we may have to do a closed meeting to talk about it, is there are those of us who believe the policy has been followed. There are those of us who believe the policy hasn't been followed. If putting this language in, actually, no, I take that back. I'm not sure what, it's part of why I asked, what, in terms of any policy, if the board wants to make an exception to a policy, what is our prerogative? Because, we had some extreme situation in the past, an extreme situation in the past. Extreme situations often call for extreme measures. And the board took a decision as a group, a couple of decisions, that the board felt were in the best interest of the organization. And if that had us run afoul of the words of the policy, then one could say we made an exception. So that's really what I think what we need to do is decide, did the board properly make an exception in the past, or did the board not properly make an exception? If we properly made an exception, then I have no problem with putting the language in. If there's some other issue, looking at it, then I might have a problem.
Andy?
I would say that, part of the very important part of this policy is number 5, the request for bids, which gives you guidance on what a bid should be. You should have a proposed scope of work, a schedule of performance, and specifications. You should have proposed terms and conditions, names and contacts, things like that. And I think that's the part that definitely needs to make sure that occurs.
But the board doesn't have staff to make sure that that occurs.
But it can use staff to make it.
Not if staff doesn't want to, or won't.
Wait a minute, Alan. No. We do direct staff, amazingly enough, at times, to do things.
But we can only direct the president to do things. We can't direct other staff to do things.
But this all gets back to the board can approve an exception. It says it right here in 9B.
It's a monetary exception, right?
Is this creating like any kind of major negative impact, or is it just, we're asking why? Because if it's not creating a lot of major impact, I just wonder why we don't just move forward with it and that's when the time.
I guess the question I have is what impact does it create? That's why I'm confused, is what is the impact?
The audit committee, it's already been clarified. The audit committee asked for clarification. If we don't have any concern with adding clarification, just add it and move on.
That still doesn't answer the question, what's the impact? I think John has the answer to this.
I mean, it could have a legal implication, but, as a practical matter, it's a policy statement that says you're going to be held to the same standard as everyone else. And as a matter of policy, that makes a difference. Now, whether you choose to make an exception, that's fine. But, if I'm looking at it from the outside, I'd say, well, they better had a good reason to make that exception, because the policy is they were supposed to go through it. And I think if you say that, for somebody who comes from a lawyer perspective, that's a difference. And so what you're arguing is the exception follows the rule, so why make, swallows the rule, so why make a change? I'm just saying that as a matter of policy, if you say, look, we have this policy, we're subject to it, yeah, we can make exceptions, It's a stronger statement. That's what it is.
I guess the question I have is why don't we have this language on every policy? Specify that every policy applies to the board. Karen?
Is the intent of the changes to hamstring the board so that it cannot hire its own attorney if it needs to?
I think.
Can the board, if the
The only
board,
thing I know is the audit committee recommended, they thought it made sense.
if the
I'm
board,
sure it relates to the situation that was discussed that we don't want to get into, and maybe that's the reason. I wasn't at the audit committee, but I can't give a theoretical answer to a question that doesn't have all the facts laid out. I don't think that was the intent from my understanding from what the audit committee said, but I wasn't there.
yeah, but can I follow up on that? So can the board, if this policy is passed and the board experiences something similar that that happened again, can the board act on its own and hire its own attorney?
Yes. Because we'd have to make a decision that that there's a good reason to create an exception to not follow the policy, and then we'd move forward.
Andy?
I want to say that in the past, the board has followed the policy and has hired its own lawyers. I mean, I know, because I was on the board when we did this. So yes, the board, following the policy, can hire its own lawyers, make its own decision. Absolutely.
I don't have to put out a competitive bid. I don't have to have an RFP. We can, I'm speaking I as in the board.
So if there's a good reason to create an exception to the policy, the board can absolutely state that. And I think what John was saying is that it's just better to formally say, the reason why we're not going by policy is because of X, Y, Z, as opposed to just assuming that we don't have to follow the policy.
So if we say that the policy, if we add the language that says this applies to the board of directors, does that change what I just asked?
My opinion is no. That's the reason why I'm asking why we're getting into the conversation, because any policy that the board has, we can make an exception to that policy and do what we want to do, but we have to document a good reason why we're doing that.
So I got another question. We say this applies to the board. Does this also apply to committees of the board? Because we've got committees which are they operate and they've actually made purchases.
They are the board.
Well, there's not the
Board
entire board.
operations, the audit committee.
The audit committee, board of operations.
He said the board committees.
Okay.
Board committees are the board, so.
But they're not the full board. There's a subset of the board.
They're the board.
They're the board. They're acting for the board.
They're acting for the board. Yeah.
So they can give them, they can make exceptions also based on this policy because they're part of the board.
I guess you have to look at the charter to see what they're allowed to do.
And equally, they could follow the policy and do what the policy says, because that's good business, right? And in fact, the audit committee several times over the last few years did do that.
I'm just inquiring if we should be specific and lay out the committees also, or being specific. Any other comments or questions on this agenda item? Seeing none, that brings us.
Does this go into consent?
No, it goes to a vote.
Yeah, that's a vote. A vote is the consent item.
No, it goes to a roll call vote.
Why is that?
Because I don't believe there's.
Does it have to have
consent.
3 readings?
Well, 83 readings.
83 readings? What did you say?
3 readings, 3 readings, 3 readings, 3 readings, 3 readings. Although I wouldn't mind if we had 83 readings, and we could discuss
Is
it
this
all.
reading number 2 or reading number 3?
I believe this is 1. This is the first time this showed up, so this would be reading 1. So this would go to, I believe, an April meeting and an April vote, if I remember correctly, or a March meeting and April vote, one of the two. But I would see this as a roll call vote.
Policies that are straightforward and we're generally in agreement with can be put into the consent agenda.
I understand. I just don't see that there's consent. Just from the discussion.
Yeah.
That brings us to the next, what?
It's not in the
It's not under consent. The next topic is B2, CA's easement policy.
So before Jeremy gets started, can I say a few words? So what I'd like to say, first of all, is that every easement is approved by the board. And that wasn't always the case. And the easement policy is evolutionary in nature. And that, we have heard what has been said about the easement policy as it sits right now. And regardless of the fact that the board approves everything, and the board can take as much time in the approval and ask for any additional information that they want, I also believe that there's some significant and substantive changes that we can make to the way we operate now that would indicate that we've heard from people in terms of what we should do differently. I don't believe, though, that we should just do a wholesale replacement of the existing policy, and that there are some serious issues. I looked at just got the letter from the county today. I haven't had time to study it in detail, but there are some significant shortcomings in the proposal. But I think, with that being said, that there are ways to improve what we have in a way that address at least some of the concerns that residents and others have spoken to about the existing easement policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Dennis. I was thinking I could merge the pool discussion with easements. You want to try that?
Go for it. Kind of blow it up.
Right? Let's just go.
Go for it.
That's a motion. A motion. I think we raise easement.
Pull Dan into that table with you.
Right. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's been Dennis's tactic for 10 years that I've been here.
I want to raise our easement fees to pay for the pools.
Oh, man.
It's an idea.
That's where I'm going.
Oh, man.
Getting late.
Okay.
How much are we charging for this application process?
Okay. Thank you all for the time this evening. So when John gave his presentation a couple weeks ago, there was some content that he wasn't able to get to, or I sort of thought wasn't fully covered. So I thought I would just sort of go through this really quickly. I think it might be more effective if there are questions, maybe those are sort of held to the end, and that way we can try to get through some of this content so there's a clear understanding if that's okay. Okay, so I think John covered this pretty well, last time around in terms of the policy that exists right now that staff is executing. The key words being the social welfare of the people of Columbia. It's a rigorous multi-phase process that we execute. It takes a significant amount of time on the part of staff to execute it through all three phases. It can be years and many hours of staff time to execute. We effectively become a part of the applicant's project team, working with whoever it is, whether it's the county or Howard Hughes or BGE throughout the entire process. Most of the community operations department at some level is a part of the process, whether it's capital improvements or open space, because it's touching on multiple aspects of our operations in most cases. So in terms of the types of applicants, again, it's Howard Hughes, it's residents, it's BGE. The types of requests, they're usually fairly benign, right? It's a 10-foot easement for a new sanitary sewer. It's a sidewalk somewhere associated with the Lakefront North development or Lakefront South. Or it's BGE needing to install a new piece of infrastructure associated with their electrical grid in the community. So in terms of the process, so it's basically three phases. So there's the application phase, basically where the applicant sort of reaches out to us through our online portal, through our real estate services page. Typically there's a pre-submission meeting or a call about what the project's about. The applicant makes a submission. As part of that process, when working with staff, the applicant is required to notify the village manager of the project. And there's a technical review, fee assessment, and then that package comes to the board for review and approval. So again, the board has full power over the approval of these easements. Now, phase two is typically the longer part of the process. So this is, once the easement is granted, then the project more or less can proceed in most cases. And in the example of Lakefront North, that's a multi-year process. And so we're regularly interfacing with the developer on that project, carrying it through at the table as a party to that project once we're on board. And then phase 3 is where the project is actually executed or completed. And in some cases, for a large development, that can take a year as well, or it can take, a matter of weeks for a smaller, like just simple sewer line installation. And so there's typically a pre-construction site visit. Again, so this is sort of ramps up. This is sort of another high point for staff interaction in terms of what's happening with that particular project. Residents are notified before that work happens. Continuing monitoring and coordination efforts throughout that project. And then once the project closes out, basically verification and confirmation that any type of impact on open space was mitigated as required by the easement. So, just some typical projects. So Roslyn Rise, right? So as a part of that development, they needed supplemental emergency responder access. Basically, fire trucks needed to be able to get close enough to that facility to respond in emergency. So in working with the developer, we executed a land swap to facilitate that access. So, and you can see how long it took. So the start date in terms of the application was 2019. That project is wrapping up. So that was a 5-year process, and we've been involved in that throughout the entire time. And then there's really small ones like this one that was approved last year by the board, which is essentially just an expansion of an existing floodplain easement with Howard County to help them facilitate some work associated with the stormwater management project. And then just to review in terms of the concerns around public notification. So this is just sort of a summary of the aspects of the notification process across 3 phases. So phase 1, village manager is required to be notified by the applicant, the CA board packet and meetings for approval. All the documentation associated with the easement request are publicly available through the board process. And then phase 3, where the village is contacted prior to the actual construction process. And this is an example of a letter that was sent to the River Hill Village Board associated with the Shaw property development that was a 10-foot sewer easement in that community. And then we actually had staff that went around to the neighborhood, knocked on doors, put door hangers up before that project took place, notifying them that this work was happening. And then the other aspect of this too is typically for larger projects that are going through Howard County's DPZ, there's a significant amount of public notification that's happening around, the signs you see that you can't read them as you drive by, but they're there, right? Whether it says, environmental concept plan or site development plan or whatever type of development that's happening. On some of these larger projects, there's a tremendous amount of public awareness that's happening, right? We're just a small little sliver of it. So moving on to what Dennis was alluding to at the beginning in terms of his introduction, in terms of, so let me stop right there in terms of the process. Any questions on the process as it stands? Yes.
Not so much a question, but I notice in some places on what you showed and here in the memo, it talks about there has to be a finding that the transaction is exclusively for the promotion of the social welfare, but it can't be. The person doing it wouldn't be doing it if it was just for us. They've got to have an interest in it too. I've seen other language that talks about is, basically, I don't know if it doesn't say unbalanced, but, but exclusively just seems like too high a bar. Do we really do exclusively?
Well, I think we're just applying the language around that it must provide for the social benefit of the people of Columbia, right? Yeah. Like that's the litmus.
Provide for it, but it's got to do other things as well, not just do exclusive.
Yeah, it's very subjective and it's broad, and very intentionally so.
But that language comes from our charter specifically.
Correct.
And also we're a 501c4 organization. So
for the benefit it does. I'm not sure it says exclusively for the benefit.
We're supposed to be the primary beneficiary, I think. Not
see, that's where on balance, primary, yes, there's terms of, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
As far as notifying residents, is it just the adjacent residents or is it within a certain 300 yards of a project, or does that vary?
It varies. It's subjective in terms of who the adjacent residents are. I think for the River Hill project, one of our team members just walked around to all the properties that bordered that piece of CA open space that was being worked on.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in terms of being responsive to the concerns, raised by members of the board as well as residents, so we're proposing several things that we're going to be implementing effectively immediately around how easements are executed within our operations. So the first is enhancing village level notification. So we currently leverage smart sheets to automate a lot of our business processes. It's a really powerful tool. So at the moment, when an applicant submits a request for an easement, they basically have to populate a smart sheet. And so what we've done is we've modified that particular platform to facilitate an email communication that will automatically go to the village manager as well as the village board chair, that there's a project that's being applied for in their village. What you see here is basically where a mock-up of that email, what it looks like right now. So basically notifying them, Columbia Association recently received an easement request application. It's in your village. Here's a link to another smart sheet that they have access to, that they'll be able to access the actual project details that have been submitted to us by the applicant. And as part of that process, the applicant they'll have to request a presentation to the village board that's of concern. Now, we can't mandate that, right? That's already been discussed, that we don't dictate agendas for the villages. So the request will be made. And then we'll be actively tracking that notification process as it moves along. So that's one piece of it, basically more aggressively notifying the villages in a formal way, controlled by staff, leveraging our internal tools to automate the process as seamlessly as possible and make sure the information associated with that easement application is accessible to the village manager as well as the village board chair. Attention, an easement request is coming in your community. Sorry, the reverb happened perfectly where it just worked. So we've developed this additional signage to go up in the community. I wanted it to look very much like the county signage and stick with, I know, right? And stick with the very bland colored, not that, if there's county folks watching, I love you. But I was thinking maybe we could stick, because there is a recognition in the community about what those signs mean when you see them on the side of the road, right? It means, oh, there's a land use change happening here. Now, maybe I have difficulty reading it, but I know there's something coming here. So my initial sense was to actually make the signage kind of align with the look and feel of that, so our residents would know, oh, hey, there's a land use change happening here. But in working with our communication staff, we felt something more aesthetically pleasing might be more effective. So this is a sign we have right now that we'll be deploying going forward for future easements. So basically, once that application comes in, we'll print up this sign, we'll put it on the piece of open space or whatever piece of CA property it is that's being impacted by the applied easement. There's a QR code on there. And so anybody who happens to see this sign can walk up to it with their phone or whatever it is, whatever device they have, hit that QR code and go to a new page that we're going to be building out on our real estate services page that will have a table of all easement applications that are currently under consideration by staff. So we'll have a sign in place out physically in open space for residents to see, and then information on our real estate services webpage that they'll be able to access by hitting that QR code. And then the other component of this was basically three pieces to enhance our communications around easements. So the justification for the request of approval. So we're basically going to be expanding the narrative that we provide to the board as part of the application and the request from staff to approve the easement, with additional detail on what the staff assessment is of the social welfare for the benefit of the people of Columbia. Making sure we're providing as much detail as we possibly can around the rationale that staff sees for approving this easement. And there's just a listing there of what some of the categories may include. Now, typically, again, it's fairly benign. It's infrastructure. It's a pathway associated with Lakefront North. It's a 10-foot sewer easement in River Hill. It's a power line easement somewhere for BGE, right? But then there's a list of other aspects where it could be in terms of environmental improvements, public safety, annexation of additional property, alignment with the adopted community organizational plans, e.g. HOCO by design, right? So the intent is to make sure that we're as robust as possible in explaining what the welfare benefit is to the people of Columbia, so that's perfectly clear to this board when they're making those decisions. And that's it. That's what I got.
So I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. Alan?
Yeah, I think the hang-up, at least as I've experienced it, isn't about the kind of easements you've mentioned. And so to me, the challenge is how do we distinguish? And I think that's been a challenge all along. It was a challenge for the board when the staff alone had the power to approve easements, whether that was appropriate or not. Now, the board approves everything. But to me, it's how do we figure out, and I'm not asking you what they are, because I think it's ultimately a board question, but I'd love to hear anybody's ideas. What are the criteria that we would distinguish between a, if you will, benign public service easement and what, and something else? And it might be size and scope. That might be part of it. Something occurred to me, it might be, is this something that's going to change what happens above ground? Or is it just about what happens below ground and they need access to it and they're going to restore it back to the way it was so that that doesn't really affect what's ours, meaning the public's use of the land? But there's got to be some measure, because I mean, all this is great, and it's usually worked very well. It's when it hasn't worked that we've gotten in trouble.
Karen?
Yeah, so I appreciate the enhancements that you guys are suggesting here. I think that the notification, doing a better job on social welfare, I think that's all very welcome. What's missing for me, and I shared my proposal with everybody here, so you guys have seen it, is the independent review. And that's, and the appraisal that goes with that. And I think that honestly, the more and more I've thought about the changes that I want to see, the more and more I think that that independent appraisal is a critical piece. And it doesn't just protect the CA board, because we don't have the expertise. Nobody here is an expert on all this stuff. We need to rely on somebody. We rely on the staff. I honestly think that's incredibly unfair of us to rely on them to always be the experts. I think we need to have that independent evaluation that says, is what we're doing right? And I think it doesn't matter the size of the project, and I'll tell you why. I think, Bob Dover sent us an email after we discussed the easement policy the last time, and he suggested that, what the Bureau of Land Management does is they have they contract with somebody who can provide these independent appraisals, and they're not paying them until they actually need the independent appraisal. So you have a job, and it's a small job, and you call that company and you say, hey, we have a small job, and they price it out for you. And it's not, I think a lot of people have been thinking that, this is a one size fits all. And so if you're a tiny little project, it'll be $1 billion. And if you're a big project, it'll be $1 billion. And that's not how that works. It's very proportional. So if you've got a small project, it probably takes them an hour to get you that appraisal. If you're a large project, it probably takes you several more hours, maybe a couple days, weeks, depending on the nature of the project. And I really think that is, the current policy, the way we do things, everything is internalized. And I really think it puts us at a lot of risk, because as much as we respect the staff, they don't have the expertise for a lot of things that we're asking for. And so that's the piece that is really missing for me, as well as I think that in several cases, we have not done a good job of understanding the value of our own property. I can't talk about the specific example, so it's going to sound very benign, but if I have a piece of property and nothing's happening to it, it's not worth very much, right? Nothing's happening to it, $0. But now you come and you say to me, hey, CA, I want to do this with your property. Okay, well, now my property does actually have some value, and I'm going to charge you money to use my easement, whatever the case may be, and now I can say, okay, well, I'm going to have somebody appraise the value of that property as it's being used in this contract. So CA, when you go to negotiate, you're on a much more solid ground to say, oh, okay, you're going to make this much. I think, based on the contract and what you're proposing to do, you're going to make this much, then I should get this much for the residents. This is how much I should be asking for to make sure that I'm getting fair consideration. So that's a piece that I think is really missing. And the other thing about the independent appraisal, the validation of what we're doing to say, okay, you've got this appraisal, you've got this easement request, and you're saying it has social benefits. Does it really have social benefits? I think I probably can use this example, Alan, the IAT. I think that a lot of things were promised around IAT when that first came up. And I bet if the things that I'm asking for, I think if we had done an independent appraisal of that request, we would have found that we're not going to get $40 million a year in grants. What is the social benefit to Columbia? So now we have a 40-year easement, and it's a perpetual easement, and what is the return that we're getting for our land on that piece? So I just think that let's give everybody a little bit better foundation for when we're approving these to make sure that we're taking the risk out of things. And that's why I really want to see the independent appraisal. That's why when I wrote the policy proposal, I made such rigorous requirements. And the other thing is, I know that staff has to carry this out, and I actually think what I'm asking for makes staff's job easier. I think that, in a nutshell, you get this request in and you immediately call and say, hey, we're going to need some services here to help us validate what these people are saying they want to do. You guys are going through all this rigmarole right now to do all these things to say, hey, we're going to say what the benefits are. We're going to do all this. Well, that's a lot of staff time. Well, if you have an independent entity looking at that, you don't have to do that anymore. Now you can say, when the easement comes to present, staff comes to present, and they say, hey, this is a great idea. We got it validated. We're good to go. And so, yeah, I think we need more independent oversight or independent input into what we're doing to validate our ideas.
Sky?
Yeah, this has, easements have been discussed by my village for 3 meetings in a row. It has really torn apart a lot of people that I know. Many of them are on one side, many of them are on the other side. We have a lot of information. We have Q&As, we have statements by various people. I fully intended to come here tonight and make the suggestion that legal and communications go through all this material that's written and oral and the village meetings that have discussed it, and consolidate all that information into some sort of a revised policy to give to the board to act upon. I think when we write a policy that is the function of the staff to do, I think what a policy board like us does is discuss, come up with some points that need to be in a revised policy, and hand that task over to the staff to write and to give back to us to approve. So, it seems like we have just concentrated the very few points tonight. Jeremy has enhanced his procedure very well, I think. Karen has basically talked about one part of it. We have the DPW letter. Deb Young wrote a letter to my village board Monday night that appeared about 2 hours before a village meeting, asking my village to support the proposed policy. And I'm just wondering if we're at the point where we have so much information that it would be, John and legal and communications are revisiting all the policies. So they kind of have a process in place, and I'm wondering if it's time to turn it over to them.
Could I ask a clarifying question of you, Sky? When you say Deb was in support, wanted the board, what policy was she in support of?
She was in favor of the proposed policy.
That Karen put forward?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure.
Bill?
Hi. Jeremy, did you have something?
No, I just had a follow-up to Karen, but you go ahead.
Okay, all right, thank you. A few things. Thank you for your presentation. I think that these improvements that have been stated are a step in the right direction. Couple of things. I'm leaning on my background in decision-making bodies that I've fulfilled for a decade. And I find it interesting that as an organization that has to make decisions, easements are similar to zoning decisions, other decision-making bodies that the county has. No one approaches it like we do. It seems that there's a fairly standard way that is done that I think we should look into, and I think we would receive substantial benefit in mimicking. And that we do this as a Robert's rules, everybody talks twice and then we vote. Whereas they set up a situation where you have a petitioner and anybody who cares to oppose the petition can come and provide direct testimony. And it seems to work very well for the zoning board, the planning board, the Board of Appeals, the Alcohol Beverage and Hearing Board. All of those committees also have clear criteria in which to evaluate whatever's before them. We haven't talked about criteria. I mean, there's been an oblique mention of criteria, but we haven't discussed that at all. We have no criteria. We should produce that and vote on that as a board. I think that would be a step in the right direction. I think that Planning and Zoning does a really nice job with their technical staff reports. And if your organization emulated some of that with a description of the property, the criteria in which to evaluate it, and then at the end, a recommendation, a description of the work to be done, and then in the end, a recommendation, whether to approve of modification or deny, that would go a long way because everybody would have the same baseline to work with. That would be huge. These are all things we could do in order to make this work. I think that we really should look at how specifically the Board of Appeals works because they handle this twice a month. Similar kind of stuff. It's not easements. It's usually variances. But it's a process that is respected by the people who present, the people who oppose, the board, the staff. There are people, it gets spicy sometimes, sure, but in the end, everybody says, well, we see this process work out well. Whereas when we do this, we tend to find ourselves, if we're one side or the other, there will be a party to any decision we have that will say that the decision was either arbitrary or capricious. And that is inherent in the way that we use our process. The way that the county does it, and all the counties do it, that gets removed from the situation. They guard against arbitrary and capricious.
So Bill, you mentioned we don't have criteria. We actually do have criteria. They're actually under B1, A, B, and C. So we've got criteria specified in the policy. They're just vague. Well, yes, but they're vague. I mean, it is. You can drive a truck through them.
Okay, yes. We could have better criteria. And to be clear, at the Board of Appeals level, there is one piece of criteria that says, does not alter the character of the neighborhood, which is a truck driving phrase too.
But we could. I believe these criteria come from our charter, but we could try to make them clear. What do these mean from a practical standpoint? How could we better define what these criteria mean?
Right.
Right. The other big issue, and I think the central theme that I've been hearing over and over and over again, is information and data. So one of the key pieces of data that I've found missing in the whole easement process is a sense of appraisal, what the value of the easement is. That we generally don't see that, and I think that's when Alan's talking about, is it a little benign easement, like a 1 square yard for a fire hydrant versus a humongous easement that affects tens of thousands of people? I think having that sense of appraisal can help differentiate. And in our policy, we have a statement that says that the transaction shall include the cost of the appraisal if required, but the policy doesn't say when an appraisal is required or if it's required. So there's no sense here in our current policy when is an appraisal required. It may be a good idea just to make it required de facto for all appraisals, for all easements. Karen and Jeremy.
And Bill had his hand up too.
Well, he already talked, so.
Well, Jeremy, did you want to ask me something?
I'll go to Jeremy, he hasn't talked.
Yeah, Jeremy had something you wanted to say.
Well, I just want to provide a little bit of clarification in terms of the current process. So I think it's, at the last meeting, we went around a little bit about the complexity of assessing the value of open space and what a challenge that is. And how our current process at the moment, which we've been using for a while, is to leverage the adjacent properties' assessed value from the Maryland State Department of Taxation. So that is our third-party independent source of valuation that we use for the the easement fees, that the appraised value is the adjacent process. So we do have a third-party independent source for the information. It's the state of Maryland taxation and assessment.
So from my perspective, it's not the value of the land, it's the value of the easement.
Yeah.
And those are two different concepts. So a plot of land might have a certain value, but the easement might have a very different value. So if I have a plot of land, big open space that's just sitting there, it might not have any value. It's just a bunch of land just sitting there. But if we give an easement to, say, build an NFL stadium there, then that easement has a huge value. So it's not necessarily the value of the physical land, it's the value of the easement that.
Can I reclaim my time when you're done?
We've hit our time here.
So the other thing I was going to talk about was, I like the added transparency for residents, but I also want to make sure that residents get a chance to speak. Not, so if it's a regulatory requirement that they get to speak, that they get to send their questions in, but if there's no regulatory, I also want residents to have a chance to weigh in, and that is missing from the enhancements. When do residents get to come and have their say? Is it just at resident speak out? Is it at their village board meetings? Do we have to put something special together so that they can put comments on a website, whatever we decide it is, but I also want residents to weigh in because I want us to be very careful because I feel that some people were very dismissive of the Protect Our Streams people every time that they came, and in conversations I heard outside of meetings before I was a board member where they were dismissive as well. So they did not take seriously a lot of the work that the residents had done, and I want to make sure that when residents come to speak, whether they're for or against something that we're trying to do, that we take their comments seriously and we're not dismissive of them.
Bill?
Well, I'll just speak to that. Well, first of all, I've never taken anybody's comments in a dismissive way. Secondly, well, maybe Keith's, it's a joke. But like I said, if we were to set up a structure in which we had a petitioner in opposition, that would provide for residents to provide their input at that time during that actual discussion, and not just at resident speak out while we were actually evaluating the easement. Third, if this is going to the villages, and I think it's important to notify the villages and encourage them to provide some discussion on the topic. Once again, we cannot direct them, you must provide a forum for resident speak out. It's up to them to figure that out, right? That's what we've been saying all night. So you would like to have multiple avenues, and it's some of this we're going to have to rely on others to set up the right structures.
Yes.
So a couple things. One, the size of the easement absolutely matters. You're not going to treat every easement the same way, and we're not, and the board's not. And the board didn't treat the easement for WSSI the same way as they treated everything else. And they spent a lot more time on it. It was a lot more than 11 minutes. The other is that as a board, I don't think we want to ask for, so let's say a developer, pick the ABC Development Company, wants to do something in downtown. They're going to bring affordable housing. They're going to bring amenities. They're going to bring all kinds of great stuff. But it turns out they can't do it unless there's a sewer line and we own the property. And we say, you know what? That little piece of property, you're going to make $86 million on that development. I want 42. So it's like that seems to me to be, we get the social benefit of all those things in perpetuity. Any development that takes place in the valuation of that development in perpetuity, we get the annual charge from that. There's a lot more to it than the value of what that provides at that moment to the developer. It's what does it provide to Columbia residents in the long term. And there is so much value to what we're trying to create in Columbia. Downtown Columbia is going to be, the affordable housing, the amenities, the walkability. It's going to be, it's going to be this incredible place. I'm personally looking to move to downtown Columbia. Just unbelievable. And so I don't think we can treat every easement the same and have some cookie cutter policy that requires all kinds of different hoops that you have to jump through. And I also don't believe that we should be thinking just about what we can get out of it in the short term, when in the long term, there's all kinds of social benefits that accrue to Columbia residents.
So I think my point is that it wouldn't be cookie cutter. that if you got that independent appraisal, if it's something like a sewer line, you could say, we've got this huge development, we've got an easement for a sewer line, you would present it to the contractor and they would give you, you know, a quick answer. Maybe it wouldn't be the same as a WSSI easement. You know, so I don't think it's, I think you're saying jump through hoops, but I don't actually see it as jumping through hoops. You know, I still don't understand, like, I don't see why we can't quantify the benefits of the jug handle. Monetarily, what does that mean for us? Like, is it a ton of money, or is it a little bit of money? Everybody made a guess of it, but we don't really know. So I don't understand why there's a problem with us figuring out what are the actual benefits, instead of just saying, oh, sure, have your sewer line, but then you're gonna build this huge apartment building with your own pool and your own gym, and so are we getting new members? What are we getting?
We're getting affordable housing.
Are we?
Yes.
I'll believe that when I see it.
Alan and Andy.
And we're getting the annual charge forever.
Well, that we are getting.
Well, and so I'm fine with not seeing it just from a short-term view. But to me, that's part of what it's assessing the whole impact of this easement, pros and cons, social benefits, and it's all devilishly hard to monetize. A lot of it is, but it's all part of it to me. But we're right back, as you say, if we're not going to treat them all the same, we're back to what is our criteria for distinguishing.
Andy?
That's critical.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, part of me says, what I'm hearing is from Karen is money.
It's not just.
Okay, well, because I'm thinking like, look, we just approved an easement to allow the redevelopment of the low-income housing on Cedar Lane, which I think is a really good benefit. I don't know if we're going to get any more money from it. I don't know. But I think having the affordable housing, okay, is definitely a benefit to the community. And, you know, shoot, we talk all about being able to afford to live here and things like that. The county comes to us. A lot of our easements are with the county. I mean, the county is not, I'll say, you know, a monetary benefit. They're going to put a new sewer line in. They're going to put a new sewer line in because there are a whole lot of places that need the sewer. You know, they're coming in and they're giving us, we're going to give them an easement so they can take over one of our pathways. Like Elkhorn, almost half the pathway at Elkhorn is actually a county, you know, but you can't tell it because it all looks the same. But on the other hand, the county now takes care of that and repairs it. And so I'm thinking like, well, there's a nice benefit. You know, the county's not gaining money from it. So I have a lot of problems when we talk about the county, the state. We lumped everybody in together. There's a lot more benefit than just, I'm going to get $5 or $10 from the property. So I think that's part of what we need. And I agree with Dennis that, you know, a lot of these easements are pretty cookie cutter. I mean, in a sense, we know what they are. They're utility easements, they're pathway easements. They're going to annex land, you know. And it's like, I don't want to tie them up with lots of overhead for things that don't need that. You know, if there are certain big easements, and I can understand that, you definitely want to spend more time. But for a lot of these, for the smaller ones, no, there's no reason to tie everything up.
This guy?
I think CA wants to be a good neighbor, and I don't think you can put monetary value on being a good neighbor. I think there are departments or sections at CA that are income producing, and there are others that are not, and we probably call those service service departments or whatever. And you need to have both of them. As far as the jug handle goes, that land could not have been used by CA for anything else, I assume. I don't know. Therefore, why not give the use of that land to somebody who can make good use of it that will benefit the entire community, not just that business and not just CA and not just the people that live there, but it will improve transportation for people in Harpers and Wild Lake and Hickory Ridge. So it's really hard to put a monetary value on a service because people think of it differently. And, you know, I do want to be a good neighbor in perpetuity.
So the issue I see is we talked about benefits a lot, and most easements have benefits, but also some easements also have costs or externalities to the community. And I think what needs to be clear when an easement comes to us is making sure that we as a body understand what those externalities are, understand what those costs are to residents that back up to it, to other residents. So it's not just the benefit side of the equation, it's also understanding what the externalities are. Because every time you do something, there's all kinds of side effects. And when we balance out the benefits, we also need to balance out the externalities and the costs. And that's the key thing that I, as a board member, want to see more information on when an easement comes to us. Any last comments or questions, Karen?
Yeah, I would just like to ask, I mean, we're going to discuss this one more time in March. I would really like to submit, which I've tried to do this multiple times, and it keeps getting left out of the packet, is I would really like to submit the policy that I wrote as a proposal to be considered in its entirety compared to the existing policy. I'd like it to be reviewed by staff, and I would like the whole board to consider that.
Are there any objections to that request?
Well, I'd point out the county just sent a big objection.
Well, I can show you Deb Young's letter of support too, Andy. I mean,
Yes, but let me tell you, Deb Young doesn't even speak for the county council, okay? We're talking the county government, the county government. Eric, the county government just sent us a letter.
I get that.
All right, so you're ignoring their input.
The Department of Public Works, not the entire government.
Not ignoring that. The request.
And I think it should be considered. I'm not trying to mock it. I apologize. I think this should be considered along with my policy. I think there's no good reason not to consider the policy that I've proposed alongside what they've said. I have never, ever advocated that my policy is perfect. I've always wanted it to be collaborative. But unfortunately, when I first submitted it to the board, when I first asked for the easement policy to be part of the discussion, Andy, you blocked my policy from even being discussed. So we didn't even get a chance to have any kind of collaboration because it wasn't even included in the packets over a month ago when we first talked about the easement policy.
And Andy, your point of bringing this letter up really makes Karen's point because they've written a letter objecting to a policy that we aren't even looking at.
Yep.
Sky?
I'd like to counter Karen's suggestion and repeat my suggestion that we have a ton of information. We have 2 letters, one from Deb Young, one from DPW. We have a proposed policy. We have meeting minutes from my village's 3 meetings before it was even discussed by CA. We've got some enhancements to the policy, and I again would like to recommend that we hand all of this over to the policy updater people who are legal and communications.
So I think that's sort of.
Rather than limiting it to what you said.
Well, I don't even think it should be.
I think
DPW's letter?
Sky, I think you and Karen are in agreement.
No. I firmly believe that they're not.
Well,
I was asking Karen because.
Well, the fact of the matter is I want I've said this in my emails to the board. I want the entire board to weigh in on what I'm proposing here. I do think it needs to be refined. For example, one of the things that was raised to me was like, if I live in, my house backs up to CA property and I need to have a tree removed and somebody needs to come in and do tree removal, do I have to go through this whole easement policy? Well, that would be crazy. So I would like to see some language around that in the policy that I'm proposing that helps make this a livable policy, but at the same time, make sure that we get fair consideration.
Keith?
So my objection is the board debating the policy, and we've talked about this. My preference would be to give all that information to staff, because it's a list of recommendations, and I agree with what you're saying. here's all the documents that we've provided, because that's resident input, right? And we want to value resident input. And then we take all of that information, and then the staff comes back, and if the staff wants to throw the policy away and adopt the policy, so be it. But if the staff takes all those recommendations and then says, we've vetted all of these types of things and we're going to include these elements into the existing policy, I would prefer to go that route. That's where my stance has always been, and that's the resident input that I believe needs to happen. And frankly, maybe we need to codify this, but I think that's the process that we should start using, because I go back and I look at the ethics, and I don't know, we had like 3 billion ethics policies that everybody wanted to rewrite, and it just became a nightmare in terms of trying to, bring all the things together. So
But we got one.
I appreciate but how many months, years, or whatever it is take? I appreciate the intentions, and I look at that as resident feedback. I want to debate that stuff after staff has looked at it and decided, do we want to take this policy, or do we want to incorporate things into our existing policy?
Alan?
People often say I missed both ends. I think you're both right. I don't see anything wrong with that process. I also don't see anything wrong with saying this is what a board member has put some time into, we'd like to have for people's awareness. Otherwise, it ends up being very patchwork. Only certain people have seen it, some people haven't. People talk about it, people write letters about it, but people don't even know what they're writing the letter about, and that's unfortunate. Other piece, though, is I would say that I don't think legal and communications are the people to, legal has a function to weigh in around the legality of a policy. From a legal point of view, communications may be about the community notification process, but it's really our open space folks who are the closest we have to experts in this kind of thing. So I would not want to limit it just to legal and communications.
Bill?
Irrespective of any policy that's being considered, I strongly believe that any easement that we consider, all board members need to visit the subject property prior to actually looking at it as a board. I think that needs to be written into anything that we do from this day forward. I just want to get that on the record.
How would we pass any easement then if one board member decides to not show up?
Well, then that's going to, then that person would not be able to vote on it, I would say.
You can't take away the right to vote.
You can't take a vote away.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a quandary, but I think that it's kind of, important to be able to look at what we're actually voting on. And that needs to be written in to make sure that people do it.
Pictures can be taken for most of these to show us.
We could all do it through Google Maps, and that's, no, you should walk, you should feel the earth under you, you should smell the scene, you should understand what's going on.
We're
It's not a
talking
big
about sewer
ask.
lines. I don't want to smell the scene.
It's not a big ask.
Keith, can we get off the smelling sewer lines? Keith,
Were you?
Keith is ahead of me, but
Okay,
Keith
so
and Karen.
the piece that I'd like to say is, again, staff is doing this in a full-time capacity. So I would prefer for them to take a look at all the information and to come back to us with what they see as the recommendations. I value all of the resident input, I really do. But I don't want to sit here and try and debate a policy that's not come from staff.
Karen?
well, I mean, Keith, so two things. So first, I asked for my policy to be reviewed the first time we met. Eric tried to ask staff to review it, and everybody on the board gave him a really, really hard time about that, which I don't understand. So now we're saying that we are going to go through this whole process. Second of all, board sets the policy. I don't know why we have to wait for staff to write a policy if there's an urgent need. I get John's doing a review of all the policies. I think that's fantastic. If we have an urgent need to change a policy, which I think in this case we do, I don't know why we can't put together our policy proposals and ask for it to be reviewed. I don't know why we can't. The board wrote the ethics policy. I know that was a painful experience. I should say mostly wrote the ethics policy.
Yeah, I don't think so, right?
Ended up
It
not
was the
being that
staff that wrote the ethics policy.
Dennis?
We have.
Try to rewrite it, but.
Dennis?
Don't do it again.
So a couple things. One, I think that, Karen, if you'd brought it to staff, there's some pieces of it that would have been removed from day one that are never going to make it into a final policy. And the letter that we got from the county, the people that actually administer easements for the county, shows how many problems there are with that policy. Now, there are some things that should come back and should be part of a new policy, but honestly, most of them probably won't make it past legal. With that being said, I think staff should bring something to the board for them to approve as a policy, not come from the board and not be vetted by legal in advance, or even by the logistics of doing something. The idea, for instance, that I could have told you right away that the permit comes after the easement is approved, not before the easement is approved.
Which is why in my policy, I put conditional approval.
So what I'm saying is I agree with Keith. Let us take everything in and come back with something, take the existing policy, or maybe blow it up completely, but come back with something.
So, Sky?
Yeah, Ellen, the reason I suggested legal and communications is it's my understanding that those two departments are looking at all the policies now. And I agree, Jeremy should have a major input in the subject matter of it.
I would recommend the CEO determine who in the staff is best qualified to do the review, and if he needs, and let him figure out which staff members to bring in. I think from what I'm hearing is like, yes, we want to definitely go through staff. We want to make sure that staff reviews it in context of the letters we're getting back from the county, in context of the letters we're getting back from the villages. But I think the biggest thing is like right now we're debating something that's not even available to the public. So I'd like to get to the point where at least we're debating something that's in the packet.
Just to that point,
yes,
Mr. Chairman, this policy that we're discussing that has not been made public yet, or not available to the public, your words, right?
Well, it's not on our website.
Yes. There is a transparency clause in there that says that the public needs 14 days to consider it, and I'd like that policy to be published in a manner such that it's consistent with its own internal policy, so that people have at least 14 days to look at the policy before we start discussing.
I think it was a template. I think the idea here is that we definitely need a staff review of the policy. Come back with recommendations. What are the things that are good about the policy? What are the things that are problematic that might need to be changed? Come back with.
I don't agree. That's not what we said.
Feels like that's what we said.
It feels like what we said.
We said to gather all this information that we
in the
already
context of all the information, and
including what I wrote.
Yeah. You mean the existing policy is what works, what doesn't, right?
We've got an existing policy.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some suggested changes to the existing policy, which are fairly significant. We've got comments on those suggestions, which are sort of amorphous, not amorphous, but sort of blind, because they're commenting on a policy that we haven't actually put in the packet, but I guess I've got a copy of it through the villages. So that's the situation. So we've got a lot of comments on a policy that hasn't been posted by CA. It's been in village packets, I believe. And I think the appropriate thing to do is have staff look at the policy in the context of the feedback that has been already generated, in the context of our current policy, and be able to come back with some recommendations based on that. And if there's significant issues, I'd like to learn about that, because if you see issues with the policy that Karen proposed, I think it's important for us to learn about what those issues are. So I would be interested in learning about that. This is definitely an informational thing, Jeremy.
So can I suggest in whatever path we take going forward, we narrow the focus to easements?
As opposed to? As
opposed to licenses and leases and rights of entry, and because we execute, 70 license agreements for 5Ks, I don't think we don't need to spend our time evaluating our process for Charm City to run a 5K somewhere in town. Like, I would like to narrow our focus to easements.
That's just criteria, right?
I guess so. Andy?
I just want to make sure. So what I've heard is staff takes back all the information, Karen's policy, comments, letters, and everything, and then they come back to the board with a recommendation or a set of recommendations. That's what comes back to the board.
Yes, and I think the key things that I've heard as far as what people have been looking for are just really information, being able to, when we're voting on an easement, be able to have more information on the easement, whether it is an appraisal of the easement, whether it's a better description of the benefits and also the externalities, so that we can better understand what the impacts are. I think that's the key thing, is board members want to have more information and also be able to distinguish between simple, benign easements, that's a 1 square yard easement for a fire hydrant, versus something that's seriously impactful.
Just broadly, when staff is evaluating, is it acceptable to go through the criteria and have items that the board is not voting on? Is that an acceptable recommendation from the board?
Like, what's an example? I don't know what you mean.
I don't know, so that doesn't work. The sewer line, something or the other that's happening, is that, I'm just asking generally, when recommendations are coming back, is that totally off the table for staff to come back and say that there's certain easements that are not going to come to the board?
Can I ask a question?
No, they all
about
have
that?
to. They all
I
have to.
understand that. What I'm saying is there any objection to the staff coming back with a recommendation that not all easements come to the board?
I think somewhere that runs afoul of our charters.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Follow the charter.
Eric, can I ask a
Well, wait a
question?
second, I'm sorry. But not all easements came to the board before.
And it was determined that the board,
That it was-
there was
okay.
a letter from the state, you're not following your
I
charter.
got you. Okay, thank
So
you.
I have a quick question. So we just got this letter from the Department of Planning and Zoning, like sewer lines, Public Works, sorry. Bill's got me planning and zoning in my head. So, I know that BGE has a permanent easement to come on our property and do repairs and things like that. Don't we have similar things? I would think we have similar things in place with the county to come and do repairs and maintenance and things like that.
We have some, but not everyone.
And not for easements.
Yeah,
And I thought that BG&E had their separate, it's not they're not required to come to us, I thought. I thought we had a conversation.
I think it's the same thing like you have on your property with the utilities. If they need to make a utility repair, they just come on and do their thing.
But we have a good relationship, so they do work with us, right?
Yeah.
So-
Correct. We have a right of entry agreement with them where they notify us as a courtesy because we work with them so well.
Yeah, my biggest concern with some of this stuff, though, is the Longfellow stream restoration was done for the State Highway Administration. So I'm very concerned. I don't want to make exemptions for state and county when we're talking about, when we're doing appraisals and whatever the staff comes up with. I want to be very careful that there are things that we do want to have the most rigorous information on those.
So I'll ask Dennis, do you have a good idea on the way forward?
This is my going away present to Dennis.
So I want to say that it's crystal clear in my mind. I'm not sure everyone sees my mind the same way, though. So my plan would be to take all the information that we have and then come back with what we think might make sense for a new policy. That doesn't include posting Karen's unless the board as a body votes to put that in there. It doesn't include posting the letter from Howard County DPW about all the perils of that proposed policy. It doesn't include posting stuff from Hickory Ridge. What it means is that we'll come back and post whatever we come up with. The only thing I don't know is not clear to me is if it can be done in time for the next meeting. It's not a small lift.
That's 1 week.
Is it on the agenda for
It's on the agenda, but not to completely reinvent it, and John's shaking his head. So if we're going to reinvent it and come up with all kinds of criteria and evaluate appraisals and...
We could move it to April and do some juggling.
Let's talk about it tomorrow.
We could juggle some things.
But it's crystal
If we
clear to
juggle
me
it,
that
can we put the play area on? Sorry.
That could be something.
That's my request.
But if they can come back sooner, then that could be a nice swap.
Yeah.
The
play area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell Jason I got
probably
his,
roughly the same
I fulfilled
timeframe.
my promise to Jason and Casey from last night.
So, Alan, and then we actually have an agenda.
I guess I'm not, you used the word emergency, I'm not sure this is an emergency. We
said it was urgent.
Well, I think this is something we need to look at, but as I think of it, I can only think of 3 or 4, maybe there are more easements in the relatively recent past that have been problematic. And so I think part of this should be a look at, I'd like the staff to look at those that ended up being problematic. I think the Longfellow, the WSSI, I guess the jug handle, perhaps the collect, I don't know if that's an easement, that's a different.
That's why I think it needs to include more than easements.
Reasonable lift.
Inner Arbor.
Last comment, what also needs to be in there?
Well, like I'm concerned about, like the appraisals come in, I'm sorry, Alan.
It's use of land stuff, so, but if we would just put that aside for a second, I'd like the staff to look at those as objectively as you all can, knowing that as a staff, you were in favor of those things. And say, okay, what made those problematic? And I think we can maybe start to figure out what some of the, you can help us start to figure out what are some of the criteria that would have us take that extra pause. I mean, I agree with you. I know the number 11 minutes is out there. That probably was the actual amount of time in the last vote. But I was part of the board then. We didn't talk about WSSI, that easement. I don't even think it's not about WSSI, it's about that area. Anywhere near enough. We didn't have anywhere near enough of a variety of inputs to it was, oh, hey, free work on our stuff. Isn't that cool? Great. Yeah, I'm all for it. And so we need something that can differentiate those things so we don't fall into those pitfalls, but also don't burden the standard things that don't affect above the ground. It just are easements on below ground.
10 seconds, I'd like to get to the next
Just
agenda.
to button up on what Alan's saying is, when you look at a planning board or one zoning board, if you look at the time they actually deliberate, it's probably about 8 minutes or 5 minutes on all kinds of very fundamental things that affect far more than anything that we will ever have been challenged with here. But they spent the entire evening discussing it. And then that is what is actually conveyed to the public and to the petitioner and to the staff. And that's the magic.
That's good to know.
So we can consider that too as part of the review.
Yeah, possibly. Anyway, I'd like to get to the next section. I'm going to combine 3 and 4 in the interest of time, new business, old business, and the 3 reading rule. These are very related. Basically, the idea behind the new business, old business agenda is to make all our work sessions, turn all our work sessions into meetings, where we have a meeting, and then basically there's 2 parts to any policy or any vote. There's old business and new business. So if we have something new that comes up, that goes under new business, and that's really discussion. So that would be something that we do in a work session typically. But in this case, you could sort of do both in the same meeting. So you could have a new thing come up that would go under new business, and that's just for discussion. And then you have and then I guess the next meeting, then that would go from new business to old business, and then at that point you can vote on it. I think as part of this policy, this suggested actually changing the schedule for meetings. So currently we have 20 meetings, and right now does this policy change the schedule from 20 meetings to 15 meetings?
I'm going to make a motion that we do that. I'm going to make a motion when we consider this, so we reduce the number of meetings.
It's already in here. You don't need to make the motion.
Is it?
It's in the schedule's in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
It says the board of directors holds meetings the second and fourth Thursday of the month except for August.
Did that not?
That would be 22 meetings.
But that's not, we don't do that now.
No, we don't.
Wait.
I know, that's why I said I'm going to make an amendment.
No, wait.
To kind of cover that.
Are we missing this is the old one.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the old policy. Where's the new policy?
Regardless, the intention is to reduce the number of meetings.
Yeah,
So
regardless.
there won't be any meetings in November or December?
No, there would be a meeting in November and December, like we normally have.
One meeting.
We always have one meeting in November and December.
It says we have 2.
8, 10, 12,
We never have 2 meetings in November, December.
One in June, July.
16, 18, oh, 20, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, we have.
Where is that mentioned?
That's what we're basically doing.
There's.
It did
Currently we have 20 meetings. So 2 meetings a month, except for August, which has 0, and November, December, which have one.
Right.
So the idea would be to move from 20 meetings to 15 meetings.
Because,
Because now with the old business, new business policy, what you could do is instead of, and if we go from a 3 reading rule to a 2 reading rule for most motions.
we already have that.
What?
We already have that. We only have a reading rule for major motions, which are already
But
defined.
we're changing, that's what a 3 reading rule change is,
Yeah,
to
so
make
they-
that,
So the
restrict that quite a bit.
So so in the packet, there's a 3 reading rule for major motions. I believe this is a change from the current policy.
Yes.
What's in the packet.
It's really unclear to me, like, for example, this says times, normally board meetings start at 7:30.
Right.
I'm going to make some amendments.
This needs to,
And it talks
this needs to be
about
updated.
attending by telephone.
Yes, I know, I
Yes.
got that one too.
This,
I'm
Andy,
not
are
ready
you writing a policy?
No, Eric and I had
Just
talked
wanna
about
make
it
sure.
beforehand, and
Where in this packet
this is the
talks
old
about
policy.
15 meetings?
This is the old policy.
Yeah, you have to go back to the prior packet.
Yeah,
in
this
order
is
to see
the
it.
old
Yeah.
policy, which needs to be, which I think needs to be marked up to account for the new meeting, old meeting proposal. Because this is, oh no, this has new business, old business in it. But the schedule didn't make it.
so why don't we put this on the next board agenda for discussion with the changes?
We could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier than trying to talk.
Yes.
Some of the changes didn't make it in.
Yeah, so I guess the key change to this, besides general updates, would be moving from 20 meetings to 15 meetings.
Help me, I didn't hear a complete answer to my question, but why is 15 better than 20? Or why?
Because that's what we're doing now.
No,
No, we're doing 20 now.
Why will this,
Oh,
So the theory is that you wouldn't need so many meetings if we adjust the 3 meeting policy to just apply to the budget, corporate bylaws, and board operating procedures. So everything else that we've been having 3 readings on for policy, for most policies and such, would require 2 meetings.
I will say
Old
at the
business,
outset,
new business.
I would rather us have used the time for more substantive discussions. I mean, sort of apropos what Bill is talking about, the planning board will spend the whole meeting talking about something, and then the consideration part may just take a few minutes, but they spend the time talking about it. And
So why don't we?
we've already seen tonight, we set time limits, and then we,
Why don't we hold that discussion to when we actually
fine.
discuss the changes?
Scott?
so if we go to 15 meetings, when will they be?
So we have one meeting, instead of 2 in June and July and January,
You could go down to 1.
to April, you have one, because you can vote at every meeting going forward.
June, July,
No meetings in
None in
August like
August.
normal.
right?
Yeah.
2 in September,
2 in October, 1 in November,
yeah, 1
December.
in December, 1 in January, 2 in February, because you have to vote on the budget, and then 1 in March and 1 in April.
Yeah,
2 in April.
Yeah, the idea is because now you'd actually have more voting meetings. So right now we have, I think, 12 voting meetings. So you actually go from 12 voting, or 11 voting meetings, sorry. So right now you go from 11 voting meetings to 15 voting meetings. And then you take out the work sessions, which are basically meetings, but where we hamstring ourselves, we're not allowed to vote. So that's sort of the idea.
Does that mean the meetings are now going to be 6 hours long?
Yeah.
Well, no, it'd only go from 15 to 20, so that'd be a third longer.
Keith is.
Keith, so there's a few items, and I don't know to bring it up or not. There's some contradictions in here. In one area, it talks about tabling items die after 60 days. The other area, it says it dies after 90 days. There's one area.
How tough it is.
Yeah. There's one area that talks about that we won't restrict resident speak out, but then we restrict resident speak out in the agenda on an ongoing basis. There's contradictions or special rules that contradict the policy that say that the BOC approves the agenda and only the chair or the president and CEO can change the agenda. Then we have special rules that say 2/3 of the board can change the agenda. So I'm just wondering, how should we handle some of those
So
internal
I
inconsistencies.
think based on sort of our general discussion of how policy should flow, I think what we need to do is have staff review this for, okay, how consistent is this for our general procedures, and come back with some recommendation to basically update this to reflect
Where
how
did
we're
this come
generally
from in
operating.
the first place?
This is, I think, our current policy with the change to for new business, old business, which I believe was in the last packet.
So I should send my comments, I don't have to bring them all up, I could just send my comments to staff and then we can, okay.
Yeah, CC the board though.
So is Andy writing the new business, old business? Oh, because I thought Bill was doing it.
Bill?
I started, took the board governing documents, took a hack at it. I artfully reworded things. And then I sent it along to Dennis and John and said, please review this and make sure it's, and then I think that there was a discussion that was made here. So it's evolving.
Okay.
I'm sitting on my hands trying not to jump in the middle of this. It's interesting hearing the changes that are being discussed. So, yeah, I did start it though.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to see in the next packet is a markup to show what the changes are, because it's not obvious what's different. Just strikeout version. Yeah, have a strikeout version so we can see what's actually being changed.
And Karen, just for the record of discussion, I had a problem, and I told you about this also with the policy being developed and then reviewed. I had the same issue from that standpoint, because I do believe that we need to come up with suggestions and then pass those on to staff for staff to evaluate and bring to the table. That's just my opinion as a board
I'm
member,
okay
but-
with that. I'm sorry to interrupt Alan and anybody else has their hands up. I'm actually okay with that, but we do not have a written policy and procedure for how this works.
Yeah. And it's on my short
I'm
list.
actually not seeing what you want is, I was going to ask you about this, because normally I'm in great agreement with everything you say. I don't understand the difference between, in this case, Bill coming up with some ideas and then passing them to the staff, or you sending an email with your ideas to the staff. It just doesn't. I think of the county, the council doesn't say, executive, we want you to develop a policy that we're going to look at. Sometimes the executive does develop a law that he wants, in this case, the council to look at, but sometimes they write their own and look at it. I don't really see I don't understand, and I'd like to understand why what you're holding fast to, since ultimately the staff's going to review it and the board's going to approve it or not.
Yeah, my preference is, can I answer that?
I just wanted to make one comment. I think the thing that's missing is how a bill becomes a law in CA world. So there's no policy of how a policy becomes a policy.
I used to know the guy who drew the
bill.
Yeah, I'm only a bill. I'm just.
We used to actually have this, believe it or not, when we had committees.
Schoolhouse Rock.
When we actually had committees, there actually was a process built into it of how a bill flows to the committee and then goes up and eventually gets to the board for a vote. Yeah. And now without committees, that process obviously doesn't make sense. But I don't think we ever took the time to actually come up with a new process.
My preference is all of those were government references, and I'd like to run as far as possible away from that in certain situations. So the reason why I feel that way is primarily driven by what I experienced and what I saw with the ethics policy, when we had multiple policies that were being drafted and everyone was passionate. And what we did is we took that all to staff and we said, staff, we want you to evaluate this version, and then I need you to evaluate this version that came from a different person. And by the way, I rewrote this one and I reorganized it so that it's readable for me, but not for anybody else. And it was just one thing after another. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. And the best way that I can see to avoid that and make it clean and easy is just to make a consistent rule that says, you know what, submit your ideas in terms of things that you think, like, you know, we want to move to a 2-meeting, blah, 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 and then staff can rip through that sucker and make sure that it's consistent and so on and so forth. Because it's just a lot of work to go ahead and evaluate. If that one's easy, but if it's a complete rewrite, I think that's just a lot to digest versus here are the concerns that I have about what's going on in this environment. Here are the situations that created the concern. Take all of that information and respond back to me and tell me,
And in the back of my head, part of what I'm trying to do is to reduce the amount of time it takes to be a board member.
But the problem is what we often get, and this is the conundrum, is when we do that, we often get from the staff, only one board member asked for it. The whole board didn't direct us to do this.
Right.
So we're not going to do it. So
Yeah, so let's, like this said, I asked it here in an open setting, I said, I have some concerns with the policy. Is the board okay? We don't have to have a vote to say it or not, because I generally agree with what Karen has been saying in this policy, but it's just the process that we went about going through that. And I would say, yeah, let's go ahead and get it submitted so we can take a look at all this.
Yeah, just clearing some things up here. Well, we talked about the new business, old business last fall. And then as part of the board ops, I asked that we could get this on the agendas. And then the board asked me to take a look at it. I asked staff for what the existing policy was. I said, here's what I think should be changed in the existing policy, sent it back to staff, and this is where we are today. So it was pretty tightly coordinated there. It wasn't, not perfect, but that's how I think.
I'm not being critical of the process.
Yeah.
The thing I was sort of being critical of is the fact that we don't have a consistent process from item to item to item to item, and we don't have a consistent process written down, which is why it's very hard to be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue, is trying to come up with a consistent process for how do we make a new policy or rewrite a policy, because right now we don't have that codified.
as timekeeper, I just want to point out, it's 10:30, and we have about a half an hour of things left on our agenda to do.
Yes, I know, and we've got the.
So I'll say the last thing, because I just want to bring it up again, because I brought it up in the last board session, and it was bypassed, and I've brought it up consistently throughout, is that we have a board operations committee that's supposed to be handling board governance pieces, but we've decided not to follow the charter or the policy or whatever that document is that says how it's supposed to run. And all we do in that meeting is decide and set agendas. And there are elements of that board operations committee that's supposed to address exactly these types of things in terms of flow. So we can leverage what we have today in order to do it. But I brought it up. We got two committees. The two committees didn't work. Bringing up again, I think we need to use the Board Operations Committee, or we need to modify the charter and get rid of all of those elements so that we're not doing board operations in the Board Operations Committee.
Part of the problem with the Board Operations Committee is its membership keeps changing, so.
You don't know. So you don't know who's on the committee at any given day.
Well, it's just hard to track. I mean, if they're going to tackle those larger things, then it's hard to track them, and it only meets now quarterly, so it means they have big gaps between trying to make some of those.
I had some of those considerations in the last cycle to submit, and it was just shut down. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to change some of that rotation so we can get some consistency and make get some movement in what we're talking about. And the nice thing about the Board Operations Committee is that anyone can go to the Board Operations Committee. Even if we assign some people who want to roll up their sleeves and do that work, anyone can go there and contribute to that conversation. So I do believe that we need to, and if I get permission, I will absolutely take a look at that Board Operations Committee and do what I think it was intended to do in the first place.
Also, I think the charter's changed a little bit from when we actually had a committee structure to now. So that would be another thing to look at, is how that's changed and what the impacts of that are. Because I know when we had a committee, the Board Operation Committee was a committee of chairs, and there's, I think, more things attached to that committee in their charter. So that's another thing just to consider. Any further comments on this agenda item? Seeing no comments, we'll go on to the next agenda item, which is which are the sunset policies. So
what?
Keith?
Just from the last meeting, instead of an introduction, I just want to go ahead and jump in and say, from the last meeting, I'd love to see just so we don't go round and round on this, I'd like to see a vote next time that just says something along the lines, in practice, as time has gone on, policy documents in our operating have migrated from Columbia Council to the CA Board, who are also the Columbia Council. So actions related to this policy project will be decided by the CA Board of Directors, where Columbia Council is referenced. And I think if we put some kind of statement in there, we don't have to jump around in terms of this policy has Columbia Council, this policy has CA Board, just so we can make it clear as a board that that's how we want to move forward, and we don't have to include that in the debate. Okay.
So the information on the sunset policies is the same as last time. There's no new information, and it's on the agenda so that it meets the three reading rule. There's really no reading to discuss it, no reason except to get it on a third time. So I would make a motion that we move on.
So I'll just take a quick question. Is there any objections to putting the outdated policies on the consent agenda? Seeing none?
With that statement, I think we need to add that statement if.
For the next meeting.
Where does the statement go?
In the recommendation to approve.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would go in the packet.
Yep.
Okay.
Under the consent agenda, it's like, typically what happens in a consent agenda is that there's a description of what we're voting on, not just a document, but there's a narration with what the thing is we're voting on, so.
Okay.
Oh, you mean like we used to do, we required actual recommendations to be put in front of all the stuff, yeah?
Yep.
We used to do that.
So with that, no objections to putting that on the consent agenda?
I can just send that over.
Yeah, to me.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, sounds good. Questions only? Any questions?
You reference, you in this case, John, let me make sure I get to the right place. In the first of the, it's not always clear. On almost every one, you say, we're going to keep looking, we're going to keep looking, we're going to keep monitoring, we're going to keep monitoring. But there are a couple that, for example, I think the first one and one later where it seems like you're in favor. And my question is, are we lobbying for those?
Well, when we're in favor, if we see the tide going in the direction we want, and there's no need to get directly involved, like, for example, write a letter, content to have that happen. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. So unless I hear differently from the board, I think things are going the way we'd like. Some of this is behind the scenes, some of it is other people are carrying the weight, some of it is maybe we don't want to get involved. So we're pleased generally with the way things are going. And a lot of it, we spend a lot of money doing this. But if the board has some particular direction to give, I mean, that's why we're doing this. I mean, I'll just point out, just so that you all know, I'll give you an example. We haven't taken a position on this bill. It's been in the memo on House Bill 793. This is on page 4. It talks about, basically, would require the board to take a course on duties of directors. This is what Montgomery County has a law to that effect now. It would be a state law. It would be once every 3 years you have to take it. You could take it online. The Community Associations Institute is opposed to the bill because they don't like requiring everyone to do it. But I mean, it's benign, but you all are the folks that are going to have to take the course. And if you thought, you know, you don't want to take it, you know, we could oppose it.
Do we know anything about that exam? Is it that course? Is it you do it and then you're done, or is it you got to then pass something?
It's good for 3 years.
But then you have to pass something. Or is it just?
I'm not sure. The criteria is laid out by this commission that they're setting up. I don't know whether you have to pass a test, but you have to successfully complete the course in order to meet the requirements. So I guess it depends on what the course says. Usually on these courses, you know, some of them, they have little
quizzes.
4 questions you have to answer.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure everyone here, I would think, would pass it without a problem.
Okay.
I don't think it's designed to be difficult.
I did see that one. One that also caught my eye was the one where it was talking about, I think it was 152, 162, prohibited liability agreements, recreational facilities.
What page is that on now?
It is page 1,
Okay, I see it.
last one on
The
page 1.
second one down.
I have always heard the phrase, "we can't sign away our rights." Is that a truism or is that a falsism?
Well, I could tell you with respect, yeah, I mean, to this bill, our view is we wouldn't be subject to it because of the way we're viewed in the law. So while it's not a great bill, we don't like it necessarily, but our view is that it wouldn't affect us because of the unique posture of our organization under the.
Okay, I'm not sure that it says that in here, though. I would appreciate you saying that because I didn't read that in your summary.
It says would not apply, if you look at the next to last sentence, would not apply to a governmental entity as that's defined by statute.
Are we a governmental agency?
According to the statute, we are.
We are. Then why does everybody give me grief when I say we're quasi-governmental, and they get hives when I say that? Apparently we are.
It's a section that's tucked into. We got it in the law. Let's just. It's a very good.
One last question. The very next one. 266, 447, common ownership communities, the Bill of Rights. And you say that would be inconsistent with some of what we do, or some of it is inconsistent with what we do, and some of it is duplicative. Well, stuff that's duplicative, I'm not worried about. What would be the lift, and I don't need the specifics, but what would be the lift on our end if this law did pass and we had to adjust some of what we do to conform with the law?
I mean, I'd have to give you specific, I don't think we view this as a major lift for us, but I mean, I can go back and, give you some more specifics if you'd like.
Well, it's less about the specifics. I guess when I read that language, I make a tentative assumption that you're going to oppose it. And I'll say that my bias is that anytime I see someone's going to establish a Bill of Rights, I tend to be in favor of it.
Well, I think you've put your finger on the issue, right? I'm not sure if I were looking at it just from an organizational perspective, I would say it's not a good bill, but from a public relations perspective and someone who, has your point of view, it's hard to be against a Bill of Rights for the people you represent.
Right.
So that's why we put it in here, and if you all tell us
that's why I'm raising, because I want to know, does what you put in there mean that it says others have been historically in opposition. You didn't say where you all were.
Well, others have been pushing hard against the bill, and because of the aspect that you just raised, that is the appearance. I mean, we're a homeowners association. We represent the homeowners. We'd rather have other people do that, because like if you say, I'm against the people who voted for me, that's a tough position for you to take. Now, it's not a good bill, from an organizational perspective. There are things in there that we don't like.
Right, I hear you.
So that's why it's in there. I mean, if you tell me we ought to be all full bore against it, we will.
Well, I would love to see this then on our next agenda to talk about, because hear a little bit more about it, what it would mean. Because I think this is a good example of the tension that we have at CA, that we are both a corporation and a homeowner association. Agreed. And I dare say from management's point of view, if we just take that from the CEO part of your job, not the president part, all these bills go to hell. We don't want them. It just interferes with us. It adds to our problems. It adds to our duties. It puts restrictions. So I can see why we say don't do them. But for the other side, there are reasons that we have this other part of our identity, and I think we need to take that seriously.
Any further questions? Karen?
Yeah, are we supporting House Bill 280 and Senate Bill 446? Did it say there, John, and I just missed it?
What title is that?
What page?
Bottom of 2.
Bottom of 2.
And top of 3.
I just think that's a really good bill for us to support, since there's so many small HOAs. Oh, did you? Yeah, I actually, as an individual, sent a letter of support for this one, because every townhouse, so every road in a townhouse development is not necessarily a state road. It may be a private road, and a lot of times they don't have the money to repair those roads. I think in my village, it's Emerson Hill or something. Theirs is a state road. There's our public road. So this, if they need repaving or anything like that, the state will come in and do it. But then the townhouses that are down below the Talbot Springs Pool, those are all private roads. And so it can be very costly for them to have to repave their own roads. This is just one example. So this bill is really just an enabling bill for the county council to then establish a fund that would come out of some of the taxes to help provide grants to do some of that work for homeowners associations.
Would CA be able to get grants for, say, our pathways, or?
I don't know if we would be able to get a grant, but like it would be nice, well, because,
Well, and at the same time, there's also HOAs inside CA, which I think some of them actually have their own mini roads, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's what she's talking about.
Yeah.
But actually inside CA.
Right, like, well.
Inside CA.
Like HOAs.
Right, there's a townhouse development within,
associations.
right, that's what I'm talking about,
They're
right.
inside our assessed property, not inside property we own.
Right, so they're paying our assessment, then they also pay their own
They have their own
homeowners
HOA.
fees, but they're living on a private road. And so that townhouse development, if they need repaving or any work done to that, or any work done in their community, it could be onerous on them to have that kind of money to do it, because they don't have a
And I guess
public.
what I was clarifying is we're still talking about things that actually impact CA residents.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it would be a good bill for us to support, so I don't know, John, if you guys had.
I agree.
If we had taken a stand on that or not.
I mean, we haven't directly come out front. I think our position is that it doesn't directly affect us, although we benefit from it. And we could go out in front and do that, but it's not something that we thought we want to be out front on because we're not directly affected. But, I certainly could talk to our people in Annapolis, and, if that's what the board wants to do, please let me know, and we can take that position.
That's what we're talking about. Our current strategic plan says that we are going to be taking more advocacy posture. That's not the exact language, but advocacy does come in there. So this would be an example of something that may not be so directly affecting us, but something that's a public good that we could advocate, that's related to us, that we could advocate for. I would support that.
So when you say ask the board to take action, would it be possible to have a 5-minute vote on this, on that position at the next meeting? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, is that soon enough, John? Do you know when this is? It's already gone through the House, right?
Yeah, it's in the Senate. Yeah, it's not done yet, but, it's, as long as it doesn't have final passage, you can still take a position. But again, I'm subject to what you say. In my view, if one person says it, it's not the consensus of the board, but the board said, let me know. If you want to take a vote, you want to informally get a sense, we'll be happy to do whatever the board says.
Anybody be upset? Would anybody be upset here if they did that?
Are there any?
Well,
Sky?
I haven't really been following this, but I live on Little Patuxent Parkway, but we repave that area that we live on. My condo association does.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're on a private road.
No, Little Patuxent Parkway is not private.
Well, the main road isn't, but the part that then extends into your.
It's like we're in a cul-de-sac,
Yeah,
except the
the
cul-de-sac
driveway
has
you're on is private.
parking.
Yeah, it's.
If your
it's a private
condo fees
road.
are paying for that, it's a private road.
Yeah, it's not a county road.
Yeah.
So, I'll throw my 2 cents in here. The concern I have a little bit with it, at least not understanding or knowing it, is certain property tax revenues. And, that's a very general statement. And I'm not sure that we should be taking stances unless we really understand where and how that's coming. And the reason why I say that is, we don't just have extra money at the county laying around, is my understanding. So this is going to come from someplace. So we're either talking about over time, you're putting pressure on tax revenues and, you know, what we may have to do there. And I don't know that it's a big deal, and I don't really understand those elements, but I think I want to understand a little bit better what that means and how it's going to be funded.
Yeah, it hasn't been explained to me
I
in
get
a
your
while.
point, but as Karen said, this is an enabling bill.
Right.
This bill doesn't require a county to do it. It authorizes the county to do it. So then the county would look at its budget and say,
figure
what
out
can we
how to
do
do
and
that.
how can we do it?
Okay.
And that word certain
Yeah.
shows up all over the place. I mean, that's just legislative, you know, that's just legislative speak for,
Yeah,
it's about this thing.
sure.
So John, would you want us to take a vote on this next, in 2 weeks? Would that be
Yeah, I mean,
in time?
if you let me know what you want to do.
I don't think,
if it's the next meeting or whatever.
I don't think we need to take a vote. I think we can operate generally and say, hey, can we, if we're all comfortable, can we get a letter drafted and then we can approve the letter or something, right?
That makes sense.
Just I trust
Are there any-
if they get their guidance.
Yeah, that's fine also, if we wanted to, I'm just saying, if we wanted to approve it, we could, but maybe it's just circulating it so that.
So are there any objections to drafting a letter?
He's got his hand up.
I see that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, the part that catches my eye is that 25% of the revenues per year for any condominium association or homeowners association that has not received support from the fund, that's what goes into the amount. And
Are
basically,
you reading something we're not reading? You're reading from the actual bill?
I'm reading the actual bill, yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I mean, basically, you're setting this fund up, and then in order to establish it, the bill mandates that county, if the county goes ahead with it, okay, the bill mandates that 25% of the revenue of the property tax revenue be put into this fund if a homeowner association hasn't used it. But what I'm thinking of is, we're talking about Columbia. We're talking about 14,000 properties, say $1 billion worth of real estate tax. And if the county would establish this, 25% of that would have to be put aside.
Andy, can you read it again? Because I'm trying to remember when it got explained to me.
So
I
the
don't
county-
think it's everybody's property taxes. I think it's just the property taxes for those people who reside in those HOAs.
Right, but
Right,
if
okay.
CA is an HOA, all the property that pays our annual charge falls under this. So that's 14,000 properties here in the county, right? It's
I don't know, I would want to get that
I think it
clarified.
depends. I'm not sure that's the case. I think you need to clarify because I'm not sure all HOAs are eligible. It may just be HOAs that have things like driveways that.
No,
need
it's
that type of maintenance.
I mean,
He's reading the actual bill.
I'm reading the actual bill. Yeah, it's just that
It's more than just reading an actual bill.
maybe use at the discretion of a county or municipality for the repair of infrastructure that is traditionally maintained by the county or municipality for the benefit of the public, including roads, things like that. It's just, it's just, I'm not sure what the impact is. I can understand the smaller associations. In fact, I've got a couple in my village that could really help. It doesn't say it's those. I'm thinking of something like us.
We're not.
Like
We're not lawyers
Yeah,
here.
well, yeah, could we get, I would like to get some
I think we need some
if we can get some
legal
clarification
on this.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's why I'm kind of saying, let's
record
not.
it. Say it again.
What?
We're not lawyers.
Except for one of
Played
us.
one on stage once.
Except for one of us, but I was referring to the board.
Why don't I go back and report back? We can send you all
Yes,
the email.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I wanted, just something, I'm sorry, I missed it in the policy section is, and Reg isn't here, but he talked about the sunsetting of the military discounts that were being applied, and I don't know if that got captured anywhere.
So the thing about that policy is it's actually specific to, if you read the policy, it's actually specific to specific events that happened in the past.
Right, but those events, as Reg had said, are continuing on to this day. Is what and that's a military guy who said that event is still, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to someone who's.
Yeah, I think, so if anything, it needs to be broader. because, again, whether or not the events are occurring from a military standpoint, the important thing is, does CA recognize that as far as the policy? And given that I'm not sure this policy has been applied lately, the answer is probably no, because I don't believe it. Is anybody actually, I mean, the reason why we're sunsetting is because it hasn't been used.
Well, then we
my
should
guess.
sunset a lot of policies because there's a ton of stuff we don't use.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's why we're going through
I mean,
this.
not just
That's why-
these, I mean policies that we have today that were supposedly active that we don't follow.
Yeah, that's why we're going through this process, and we've got the first set of policies to sunset.
Well, and if it hasn't been used, maybe we should advertise it. If we want it to be used, if we don't want it to be used, sunset it.
I think the key thing with that policy is it probably needs to be either sunset or broadened to basically refer to any deployment.
I'm fine with the sunsetting of the policy. I just wanted to capture that sentiment that was brought up. I don't think we need to bring back the policy and so on and so forth, because frankly, I don't know that it belongs in there. But I think when we talk about the affordability, accessibility, all of those pieces, perhaps that's something that we need to capture and incorporate.
I think we definitely need to capture the original purpose of that policy and how that applies today, because I don't think we can apply that policy as written to today's situation, because I mean, people are deployed out, there are deployments everywhere. So I'm not sure how you could distinguish one deployment versus another deployment and do events happen, and you could have different missions. So I think the problem with that current policy as written is it's very specific to a particular period in time, which was
Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom, yeah.
10, 15, 20 years ago now. And I'm not sure that that policy really is as applicable today. I think we could, if we wanted to, we could broaden it to make it more generally applicable. But as written, I think there's some issues with that policy.
Reg is in here, so didn't want to go.
Any other questions?
I just want to thank the Board Orientation Task Force for their work. Good job.
Thanks. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? That brings us to chair's remarks, and I'll try to get us out of here by 11. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objections? Meeting's adjourned before 11.
By the way, I want to thank IT staff for the conversion.
Damn, good call.
Oh, yeah.
It was clean. It worked.